Chapter 961. Very good. Soren's voice was heard. His golden eyes stared at the ugly monkey in front of him, and then he waved his hand and the light of divinity fell. Powerful divine power poured into the ugly monkey's body. Soren gave the ugly monkey some of the divinity in his body, and also a part of the power of the shadow divinity. God's chosen. Soren was creating a true God's chosen, or there was another name for this level of God's chosen. The chosen was an existence comparable to the saints. They could mobilize the power of the gods, and they also had divinity. Other than being unable to become a god, their other abilities were very similar to the gods. There was only one way for Unchosen to become a god, and that was to be promoted by the god they believed in. Under normal circumstances, no god would easily create Unchosen. Because the cost of creating Unchosen was not small, it meant that a part of their own divinity would always be reduced. The chosen had great power, and they were also the channel of the gods. When necessary, they could directly become the incarnation of the gods. If it wasn't for the importance and danger of this mission, Soren would at most create a God's chosen, and not Unchosen. A huge amount of divine power poured into the ugly monkey's body. The golden light of divinity also appeared in his eyes. From now on, his position in the Shadow Church was second only to the High Priest and the Saint Cardinal Milan. He could mobilize more power than the Saint Cardinal, and he could use a part of the shadow divinity. Soren promoted him to chosen. A full 10 points of divinity were injected into the ugly monkey's body. With the gathering of the shadow divine power, he was now a little stronger than many demigods. At this time, Soren spoke again. I need you to go to the wasteland of destruction and despair. There is an entrance to the kingdom of the Dread Lord there. What you need to do is to sneak in and find the location of the throne of fear. A god's kingdom was very large, especially a divine kingdom of a greater divine power. The mission of the ugly monkey was the key to Soren's next action. He had to send someone strong and trustworthy to the divine kingdom of the Dread Lord, find the location of the throne of fear, and finally find a way to destroy it. No pirate leader was qualified for such a task. Currently, Soren's only candidate was the ugly monkey. For this reason, he needed to promote the ugly monkey to his chosen one and bestow him with enough power. The ugly monkey knelt on one knee in front of the statue. He could feel the surging God spirit in his body. He lowered his head calmly and said, I will not disappoint you, my lord. He didn't say much. After knowing the content of the quest, the ugly monkey knew that it was almost certain that it would die. His chances of survival were pitifully low. Entering the kingdom of a powerful evil god alone and finding the throne was almost impossible to estimate the danger. Even if he found the throne of fear in the end, once the petitioners and demons in the kingdom discovered him, it was almost impossible for him to escape the kingdom alive. Even Soren estimated that he had less than a 10% chance of surviving this quest. Soren didn't say anything. For such a loyal follower he should give enough rewards. But not now, but after the ugly monkey completed the quest or after he died. Attacking a divine kingdom was a very risky move. Any mistake could destroy the power of Mordor. Soren pondered for a moment. He waved his hand and opened a portal. He said slowly, let's go. I'll be watching you all the time. This sentence had two meanings. One was that Soren would always pay attention to the ugly monkey's movements. The other was that he would give the ugly monkey enough power when necessary. The ugly monkey humbly bowed his head. Then he didn't hesitate to step into the portal. Soren had already locked the destination with the ability of plane teleportation. The wasteland of destruction and despair. There were many cruel living environments in the lower planes, and the wasteland of destruction and despair was one of the cruelest. The wasteland of destruction and despair was not only uninhabitable, but it was so harsh that it was difficult for creatures to survive. This loaf contained a broad plain of black sand, a plain of plain granite, and a precipitous valley surrounded by steep, sharp walls of obsidian. Except for the river of blood, there was no water flowing through this wasteland. Although there was no sun in this plain, it was still very hot. There were no plants growing here, and there were almost no healthy creatures living here. Dark clouds covered the gloomy sky, and the earth was wrapped in darkness. Just like its name, this was a land full of destruction and despair. It was also the territory of the evil gods in the lower planes. There were 5 evil gods living in the wasteland of destruction and despair. They were the Dread Lord, the goddess of misfortune, Ben-Saba, the god of revenge, Hal, the goddess of torture, Lauvita, and the goddess of poison, Talona. Because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the goddess of torture had been forced to become Soren's subordinate god, and the goddess of poison, Telona, had also fallen. At present, there were only 3 gods who occupied the dominant position in the wasteland of destruction and despair. They were the Dread Lord, the goddess of misfortune, and the god of revenge. This was a plane very close to the Abyss Bloody War. The original god of tyranny, Ban, lived here. After the Dread Lord replaced him, the position of the god's kingdom had been lowered, and it was getting closer and closer to the abyss. The kingdom of fear was in the place between the wasteland of destruction and despair and the abyss. The most important symbol in the wasteland of destruction and despair was the river of blood, which flowed all the way to the 8th layer of the abyss, the Sea of Blood. This was the territory dominated by the goddess of misfortune, Ben Saba. In order to facilitate the control of these 2 places, Ben Saba built a permanent portal to the abyss in her own territory, the Blood Rock Spikes. This was a plain between the Bator Inferno and the abyss, and it was also the residence of some of the most abhorrent creatures. In addition to the devils, demons, and Ugros that escaped from the bloody war, creatures such as parrots, hellhounds, and hellbees also lived in the wasteland. Almost all the souls that came to the wasteland of destruction and despair were mortals with hatred. They would become petitioners called larvae. The larvae's appearance was very similar to the abyss worms, but there was a little difference. Most of the larvae were medium-sized worms, and their heads were similar to the appearance of mortals. Larvae, like the abyss worms, existed as currency, food, and materials. This was a very dangerous area. Because it was too close to the god's kingdom of the 5 evil gods, even the boldest adventurers did not dare to enter easily, because this place was more terrifying than exploring the abyss. At this moment, a flash of teleportation appeared. As the portal gradually disappeared, Ugly Monkey's figure appeared in a vast plain of black sand. As soon as he appeared, a hungry hellhound that was wandering nearby pounced on him in a frenzy. This was the wasteland of destruction and despair. In this barren and desolate place where even souls could not survive, most of the creatures were full of extremely strong hostility. P.S. Second update. Please recommend me. Chapter 962. The Hellhound was a very difficult creature to deal with. Especially in the wasteland of destruction and despair, the hellhounds here were more ferocious than those in other planes. They wandered in the wilderness in groups, and any creature that could be eaten would be attacked by them. When there was an extreme lack of food, a fight would even break out among the hellhounds. In the end, the weaker hellhounds would die, and the stronger hellhounds would have a full meal. Facing the incoming Cerberus, Ugly Monkey did not panic at all. He lightly shifted his feet and swung his sword in reverse. The sharp blade pierced through the Cerberus' throat. After a painful wail, the Cerberus stopped moving. After doing all this, the Ugly Monkey identified the direction and went into the shadows to explore the front. On the other side, in Mordor City, Soren had been watching the Ugly Monkey's every move. This was a very good believer. He was sophisticated and had a lot of experience. From the way he dealt with the Hellhound just now, it could be seen that the Ugly Monkey had a deep understanding of how to deal with the enemy. If it was an inexperienced rogue, the Hellhound would have summoned its companions. Exploring the Kingdom of Dread was a very difficult task. If it wasn't for the fact that there was no other way, Soren wouldn't send his best believer. During this time, he needed to keep an eye on the Ugly Monkey's movements until the other party entered the Kingdom of Dread. After entering the Kingdom of Dread, Soren would have to pay a little divine power if he wanted to observe everything with the Ugly Monkey's research. Mordor City. Laboratory. Today was a very normal day for Alice until a visitor came to her door. It was a woman covered in a large cloak. There was a dagger on each side of her slender and strong thighs. After she arrived at Alice's residence, she untied the cloak on her body, and then a beautiful face was revealed. This woman's appearance was very beautiful, but different from the women in the southern part of the continent. She had very obvious Eastern female features, a high nose, amber pupils, and a special flame emblem. Nightingale? There was a trace of surprise and joy on Alice's face. She stepped forward and hugged the woman in front of her. Softly she asked, "Why are you here?" The woman called Nightingale looked around, then smiled at Alice and said, "It seems like you're doing well here." Indeed. Compared to the desert shrouded in chaotic energy, this place is more suitable for your research. Alice's expression turned a little awkward when she heard the other party's words. No matter what, she was once a subordinate of the Eastern Empress. Although she wasn't as loyal to the Eastern Empress as the others, leaving like this was indeed a bit wrong. Nightingale looked at the other party's expression and smiled. "Don't worry. Her Excellency Dongfang Empress did not blame you. I came to Mordor City to deal with another matter." Nightingale's identity was very special. She was the most trusted bodyguard of the Eastern Crown Princess, a legendary dancer and assassin. She usually protected the Eastern Crown Princess. This time, she definitely didn't come to Mordor City for a vacation. There must be something important for her to deal with. Alice looked at the other party doubtfully. Since Nightingale came in person, something important must have happened in the Eastern Kingdom. Nightingale found a seat and sat down. Then she said softly, "What do you think of His Excellency Sorin, the owner of Mordor City?" His Excellency Sorin? Alice's expression was a little dignified. Although the other party hadn't said the reason yet, she felt that things were not that simple. So, after thinking for a while, she slowly said, "It's hard to comment on this excellency in words. But there is no doubt that he is a very outstanding, powerful and charming excellency. He values order and rules, and he built the glorious Mordor City in just a few years. It's hard to comment on such a character in a few words, but there is no doubt that he is definitely the most outstanding man in the world." Nightingale fell into silence. After a while she whispered, "Values order and rules? Is that so? How does he treat his allies?" "Allies?" Alice fell into silence when she heard the words. She thought for a while and said, "Allies? His Excellency Sorin values promises very much, so if he is an ally he should also abide by his promises, right? Did something happen?" Nightingale sighed and said, "Yes. Her Excellency the Eastern Princess is in trouble." The ancient evil appeared. Although the monks managed to invite the legendary cloud-climbing monk to seal the terrifying ancient demonic creature, the cloud-climbing monk was still a cloud-climbing monk. But many places in the Eastern Kingdom were still polluted. The entire southern part of the Eastern Kingdom had no harvest under the magic of the ancient evil, and the polluted land could not survive at all. Later a lot of things happened. The Eastern Princess was forced to take down the islands in the East Sea. Now, the entire Eastern Kingdom and the ports in the south are under our control. Alice frowned when she heard the words. She quickly grasped the key point and murmured, "The ports in the entire East Sea are under your control, including the Wave Sand Island and the Black Reef Island?" Nightingale nodded and said, "Yes." Alice frowned even more and said in a low voice, "You killed all the original allies of His Excellency Sorin?" "Yes," Nightingale said frankly. Then she thought for a while and said, "These evil guys don't care about the life and death of others." After the ancient evil appeared in the Eastern Kingdom, Her Excellency the Eastern Princess expressed that she was willing to pay a certain price in exchange for their material assistance. But I didn't expect them to be so greedy, and even their leader had excessive thoughts about Her Excellency the Eastern Princess. "Then, let's kill all of them," said Yi Futian. The Eastern Kingdom was similar to the city-state model. There was no real kingdom in the entire Eastern Kingdom. Many cities were ruled by secular forces, monasteries and nobles. The existence of the Eastern Princess was like the queen of the central city-state. She secretly controlled about 1/3 of the Eastern Kingdom, and she also had her own forces in many cities. Alice thought for a while and said, "You came here in person this time to replace those original people as partners of Mordor City?" Nightingale shook her head and said, "Not just Mordor City. My mission this time is to get the recognition of His Excellency Sorin. Her Excellency the Eastern Princess hopes that we can become allies of a true god." Alice looked at the other party and said, "When did this happen?" Nightingale seemed to know what she was asking and immediately said, "A few days ago. At present, the fleet of Mordor City should not have returned yet. Don't worry. We didn't attack them. We know the severity of this kind of thing. The news should not have been sent back yet. I came here first, and there was an official messenger sent by Her Excellency the Eastern Princess." Alice thought for a while and then said, "What do you need me to do?" Nightingale smiled and said softly, "Help us persuade His Excellency Sorin and let him accept our control of the East Sea. We won't change any of the rules he set. It's just that we will be responsible for all the trade in the Eastern Kingdom in the future. His Excellency Sorin will just change a partner and nothing else will change." Alice let out a sigh of relief and said softly, "If that's all, I can try to help." "Have those people been dealt with?" Nightingale nodded and said, "They've all been dealt with. Don't worry. We won't be careless about this kind of thing. For an evil god, there are some rules that he cares about very much. We won't make such a low-level mistake." Alice thought about it seriously and said, "That's good. You come with me tomorrow to meet His Excellency Sorin. This matter must be dealt with, otherwise if Mordor City is angered, the consequences will definitely be more serious than you think." The next day. Today, Sorin received very bad news early in the morning. The news came from the Eastern Kingdom, and the content was related to Soren's past partners. The allies who had formed an alliance with him, the monk organization and the leader of the Ronin who controlled the coastline of the Eastern Kingdom, were all wiped out overnight. The coastline trade of the entire Eastern Kingdom came to a halt. Although the fleet of Mordor City was not attacked, this matter could be big or small. The key was to see what the people who replaced the original people in charge of the eastern coastline thought. Soren would never allow the eastern route to be interrupted, so if necessary he would personally send a fleet to the Eastern Kingdom and directly bring the eastern coastline into his own control. "My lord. Lady Alice wants to see you." Just as Soren put down the information in his hand, the voice of the guard came from outside the door. Soren raised his eyebrows and said, "Let her in." He had just received the news and Alice took the initiative to visit him. It seemed that this matter was related to the Eastern Princess. Looking at the entire Eastern Kingdom, only the monastery and the Eastern Princess had the ability to eliminate his former allies overnight. "Your Excellency Soren." Alice's figure quickly appeared in front of Soren, but there was another female figure next to her. An Oriental dancer. She was also a very good assassin. After Soren glanced at the other party, he knew the identity and profession of the other party. The Great Shadow Lord. The Oriental dancer on the side stepped forward slightly and bowed. She didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but her full breasts and cleavage were exposed in front of Soren. She raised her head and smiled. "My name is Nightingale. I am the personal guard of Your Excellency the Eastern Princess. I came to Mordor City this time for the change of the owner of the East Coast. We are not hostile. In order to avoid misunderstanding, Your Excellency, the Eastern Princess sent me first. In a few days, there will be an envoy of the Eastern Princess officially arriving." So it was the Eastern Princess who made a move? Soren frowned slightly when he heard the words. Seeing his frown, Alice and Nightingale next to him couldn't help but be nervous because this was a terrible true god. Once he was angry, the consequences would be absolutely unimaginable. Soren paused for a moment, then his eyes fell on Alice next to him. Then he withdrew his gaze and said lightly, "Sit down and talk." It seemed that he had made the right bet. When Nightingale saw Soren's expression, she knew that her decision was right. It was a wise choice to find Alice before meeting Soren officially. Or else. At this moment, Soren's attitude towards her would definitely not be so friendly. Chapter 963. Soren was very angry. But he also had his own concerns. After glancing at Alice next to him, he nodded with a cold expression and said to Nightingale in front of him, "I see. Let Princess Dongfang come and talk to me in person." Hearing Soren's words, Nightingale had a lot of things that she wanted to say. She didn't even have time to say the conditions that she thought were very good. At this time, Alice gently pulled the corner of her clothes and shook her head. At this time, Nightingale understood that the whole thing was not a matter of whether the conditions were good or not, but something more serious. There were some things that she didn't understand, but Alice, who was beside her, already knew. When Solon opened his mouth, Alice heard an unquestionable tone from his mouth. "That's good." Nightingale bowed respectfully to Soren, then said, "I'll pass the news to Princess Dongfang immediately." After that, Alice pulled Nightingale away. Before walking out of the room, Alice turned to look at Soren, then bowed slightly to express her gratitude. As a smart person, she knew very well that Soren's attitude today was completely because of her existence. She couldn't refuse Nightingale because Princess Dongfang had raised her. Many dancers were orphans raised by Princess Dongfang since childhood, and Alice was one of them. Soren's behavior this time was tantamount to helping her return the favor, and then she had to make a decision that was to really belong to Mordor City, or to still side with Princess Dongfang in her heart. Arcane Tower, Astrology Platform. Gloria looked at the information sent in front of her, then looked up at Soren and whispered, "You made the right decision. Mordor City doesn't have much spare power to control the Eastern Kingdom now. The Wind Spear Hills and the South Coast have already restrained half of our forces. Even if we take down the East Coast, we have no spare power to control it." Gloria said to control, not to occupy the East Coast. With the strength of Mordor City, it was not difficult to send troops to the East Coast, but occupying did not mean ruling. The energy and manpower needed to control the East Coast were unimaginable, and there were also differences in civilization and the power of the local nobles. If they wanted to completely control the East Coast, Mordor City must send a fallen witch-level existence to personally guard the East Coast, but at present this was impossible. This was also Soren's biggest concern. The energy of Mordor City could not be controlled by the Eastern Kingdom, and he did not have the spare energy to control the territory thousands of miles away. Hearing Gloria's words, Soren remained silent. What he was thinking about was the Eastern Empress concubine, because she was a very powerful and ambitious mortal. The Eastern Empress concubine was like another princess royal, but she was more dangerous than the princess royal. This danger was not because of her strength, but because the Eastern Empress concubine had great ambition. If Soren remembered correctly, she wanted to become the Empress of the Eastern Kingdom, just like Empress Isabella. Note: Empress Isabella claimed to be a descendant of the Thorium Empire and once controlled 2/3 of the land in the south. This matter could be big or small, but the key was how Soren defined it. If this matter was defined as a provocation to Soren, then this matter would be a big deal. It would threaten the status and rule of Mordor City, and it would make many enemies eager to make a move. But if this matter was defined as another person wanting to replace someone else as a partner of Mordor City, then the impact of this matter would be much smaller, and it would not cause Soren's camp to deviate. That was why Soren asked the Eastern Empress concubine to come and talk to him in person. This was a very important issue. Otherwise, he would have to reconsider his attitude towards the East Coast. Although the group of people who were eliminated were not Soren's subordinates, they had signed an alliance agreement with him after all. Gloria gently lifted her long hair, walked to Soren's side, held his hand and slowly said, "For us, Alice is more important than the Eastern Sea route. The golem's cooperative combat ability is being studied. Alice's value is far beyond the Eastern Sea route. This matter may be an opportunity to let her join us completely." As the mistress of Mordor City, Gloria needed to consider a lot of things, and now she grasped the most important point, that was Alice's position in this matter. Soren was stunned when he heard that. Although he dealt with this matter because of Alice, he did not consider her as important. "She is very important." Gloria met Soren's gaze and explained, "She has mastered a lot of important knowledge about Mordor City. If this knowledge is brought to others, it will definitely create a threat to Mordor City. Although you brought her back, she doesn't really belong to Mordor City yet. We must use this matter to make her express her stance and make her stay in Mordor City completely." Golem Factory. This had always been Alice's responsibility. Her field of research also included the production of golem puppets. Soren didn't know the value, but Gloria knew very well that Alice already had the ability to build a golem factory independently. This alone meant that she couldn't leave Mordor City. "Okay." Soren nodded and said, "I will take care of this matter." Gloria smiled and shook her head and said softly, "You need to deal with the Eastern Empress concubine. Leave Alice to me. I'll talk to her in person." As a true god, the ruler of Mordor City, Soren was actually not suitable to talk to Alice in person, because this was tantamount to forcing her to express her stance, and there was no room for maneuver. But if Gloria talked to her, then the situation would be eased a lot. As the mistress of Mordor City, Gloria knew this very well, so it was obviously more reasonable for her to talk to Alice. Soren soon realized this. He thought for a moment and said, "Okay. I'll leave it to you to talk to Alice. I will deal with other things in the Eastern Kingdom." Because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the trade of the Eastern Kingdom had shrunk by about 1/3. Although this money was not a lot, Soren valued the influence of the Eastern Kingdom and Mordor City's ability to control the sea. If the East Coast was out of the control of Mordor City, then the nature of the whole thing would be much more serious. Soren didn't care about the money. Soren didn't care who did business with him. What he cared about was Mordor City's absolute control of the sea, and Mordor City's absolute hegemony over the four seas. Mordor City was an island in the sea. If the control of the sea was challenged, then the consequences would become quite serious. P.S. First update. Grandma was discharged from the hospital these 2 days. Fu Tu also caught a cold recently. Chapter 964. The matter of changing the owner of the Eastern Sea route was not urgent. Because the news had not reached the south coast so quickly, but this matter could not be handled carelessly because it was related to the ruling power of the city of Mordor. Soren was waiting for the arrival of the Eastern Empress. In this matter, he was actually forcing the Eastern Empress to make a statement and admit defeat. As a mid-level true god, Soren also had the qualifications and strength to do so. The Eastern Empress did not care about him and went to war with the wanderers and monks of the East Coast. This was simply a silent slap to Soren's face. In the alliance agreement there were offensive and defensive alliances. If it wasn't for the Eastern Crown Princess's discretion in doing things, she would have directly eliminated the other party. Otherwise, if there were still people who could stand up and ask Soren for help, Soren might really have to go to war with the Eastern Crown Princess because of the alliance agreement. There was no alliance agreement without allies. But if the alliance agreement existed, if Soren did not abide by it, it would be a very serious matter and there might be alignment deviation. Soren needed to deal with this matter properly. However, he also had to force the Eastern Empress to submit and make her come over personally. Otherwise, Sauron's face would definitely be lost. For a true god, the Eastern Empress attacking without warning was tantamount to offending Soren's dignity, and the danger of offending a true god must be paid a price. That was why Soren asked the Eastern Empress to come in person. Soren attached great importance to the contract. As a god of the lawful camp, Soren must personally uphold the rules. The content of the alliance agreement was cooperation, but part of the contract at that time was that if the people of the Eastern Kingdom were attacked and asked for help from Soren, he must help. Similarly, if the city of Mordor was attacked, the wanderers and monks of the Eastern Kingdom must also help. The one who signed the contract with Soren was a monastery of the lawful evil camp. Now that the monastery had been destroyed by the White Cloud sect, and the Eastern Empress had also completely destroyed the wanderers who controlled the overseas islands, there was room for reconciliation. Furthermore, Alice was also involved in this matter, so Soren's current plan was to avoid a war as much as possible. Because the ugly monkey had already found the Dreadlord's divine kingdom today, he was prepared to sneak in tomorrow. Based on the current situation, if the ugly monkey succeeded, Soren would prepare to attack the divine kingdom of Fear next month. If they started a war with the Eastern Empress, the attack on the divine nation of Fear would have to be delayed, and the losses caused by the war would take time to make up. On the third day, the envoy of the Eastern Empress had arrived. However, Soren did not meet these people. Everyone in Mordor City seemed to ignore them. Even the officials of Mordor City ignored these people and let them stay in the hotel and wait. Soren's words were clear. That was to let the Dongfang Crown Princess come to talk to him personally. Before the Dongfang Crown Princess came to Mordor City, Soren would definitely ignore these messengers. On the same day, Gloria personally went to talk to Alice seriously, and the two women talked until late at night. Nightingale didn't know what they were talking about, but when Nightingale went to find Alice the next day, the guards of the mansion told her that Alice had already gone to work on a new experiment. At this time, Nightingale also understood Alice's attitude. She had already helped this time. This was equivalent to repaying the previous favor. Alice could only help this much. The rest of the matters would have to be discussed by the Eastern Crown Princess herself. Although Soren did not know what Gloria had said to Alice, he did not know. But from her attitude, Soren also understood which side Alice had chosen. This way it was much easier for him to deal with things. At least he didn't have to worry about hurting Alice. Mordor City was actively preparing for war. In this case, as the leader of the Golem factory, Alice couldn't make any mistakes. There was no other way. Nightingale could only send the news to the Eastern Kingdom again. At the same time, she also realized that if the Eastern Empress was not willing to give in, Soren might really send troops to the East Coast. War was something she didn't want to see. Especially after coming to Mordor City in person and witnessing everything new in Mordor City, the powerful military force and the prosperous economy. Nightingale understood one thing very well. That was, if they really went to war with Mordor City, they didn't even need the evil gods to do it personally. The army of Mordor City alone could defeat them. They were just a group of Oriental dancers. Perhaps each of them was very powerful in a one-on-one fight, but there were very few real troops under the command of the Eastern Empress. If it was just a gang-level struggle, the Oriental dancers would be very terrifying because they were proficient in assassination, disguise, and spying. But if it was a war between countries, the Eastern Empress would probably have to gather most of her strength to be able to withstand a head-on battle with Mordor City. Yes. The biggest feeling Nightingale had after coming to Mordor City was that it was a sea kingdom. And Mordor City was the capital of the entire sea kingdom. The current population of Mordor City was only more than 200,000, but there were more than 30,000 troops stationed there. This was only a small part of it. The fleet guarding Mordor City had more than 10,000 people. The 7th Fleet on Snake Island had more than 6,000 people. There were about 8,000 people stationed in Port Tylon. There were nearly 3 fleets in Shipwreck Bay. Raging Sand Island had gathered 7 or 8 fleets and 3 regular legions. Some time ago, they even had a head-on fight with the Principality of Rossard. Then there were the Guard Fleet in the City of Wealth, the Patrol Fleet in Shipwreck Bay, and the Trade Fleet to and from the West Coast. Before Nightingale came to Mordor City, she would never have imagined that Mordor City had such a terrifying force. And this was only the south coast. It was said that in the north, Arendelle, Mordor City had 3 very powerful fleets. This force was really amazing. Nightingale couldn't imagine how the wealth of Mordor City could supply such a huge army. According to the information she had collected so far, the fleet of Raging Sand Island alone was enough to make them unable to go to sea at all. As for the landing battle, after learning about the Battle of Autumn Fall, Nightingale did not think that her side had much chance of winning. Sorin's legendary points were all obtained through fighting. The more she learned about Sorin in Mordor City, the more panic Nightingale felt. She sent a message back almost every day. In the past few days in Mordor City, she really realized how terrible Sorin was. The expedition to Autumn Fall, the expedition to the west coast, the expedition to the southern island countries, the naval battle in Arendelle, the blockade of the Principality of Rossard, the extermination of the indigenous people, the expedition to Treasure Island, the annexation of the Windspear Hills. Everything that Sorin had created was like a big net. Just hearing about it already made her a little breathless. The attitude of the Eastern Princess had not been expressed yet, and Sorin could not wait during this period of time. He personally went to the Southern Principality and prepared to visit the Goddess of Agriculture alone. He needed her help. And he also believed that the Goddess of Agriculture needed his help. Sorin needed to formally sign a very important alliance agreement with the other party, and this agreement was not confidential, but an alliance that was directly announced to the gods. About this point, Sorin must come up with enough sincerity and price to impress the Goddess of Agriculture. P.S. Second update. Please recommend me. Chapter 965. The Goddess of Agriculture was a very special existence among the gods. First of all, she was the daughter of Mother Gaia, so she had a special status in the natural god system. Because the greater gods of the natural god system had fallen or left, the entire natural god system was dominated by the Goddess of Forest and the Goddess of Agriculture. The Goddess of Forest was the daughter of Father Oak, and the Goddess of Spring Water and Peace was her sister, but served the Goddess of Agriculture. The aforementioned Goddess of Unicorn was her mount in battle. The Goddess of Forest and Ranger had always been the one to maintain the status of the natural pantheon. Even if she was only a mid-level god, no powerful enemy would dare to ignore her. This was because part of the power of Father Oak had been inherited by his daughter, the Goddess of Forest, Marikai. The other part of the natural god system was composed of the Goddess of Agriculture. She represented the peaceful coexistence of nature and intelligent creatures, but of course, the relationship between humans and nature. The existence of agriculture balanced the plundering and destruction of the natural world by humans. The teachings of the Goddess of Agriculture were not completely biased towards humans. She was loved by the Druids because she hoped to develop agriculture to reduce humans' demands on the natural world. If agriculture could meet most of the basic needs, then the destruction of nature and forests by humans would be reduced a lot. At present, this was correct because in places where the Goddess of Agriculture had a wide influence, agriculture was more developed. People reduced their demands on nature and forests, and more wealth was created from the land. Half of the Goddess of Agriculture belonged to the natural god system, and the other half belonged to the human god system. Her existence was special because of the relationship between Mother Gaia and the God of Light. Although her combat power was not clear, no one would easily provoke her. Sorin needed her support. This was because both Mother Gaia and the God of Light were powerful gods. At present, Mother Gaia was still sleeping, but this ancient god could wake up at any time, and her strength was not to be underestimated. The Southern Principality. This was a fertile land near the south coast, and it had more fertile land than Amber City and Whiterun. The entire Southern Principality was crossed by 2 rivers. The Goddess of Agriculture was the dominant god of this land, and her subordinate gods included the Goddess of Spring Water and Peace, the Goddess of River, the Goddess of Sprouts, and so on. These gods originally served Mother Gaia, and then after Mother Gaia retired, they followed the new Goddess of Agriculture. Many large granaries can be seen in the territory of the Goddess of Agriculture. This was the largest source of food in the entire material plane. Almost 70% of the food trade in the south was provided by this place. The believers and priests of the Goddess of Agriculture had built a large number of barns to store food. The amount of food stored here exceeded that of any kingdom on the continent. However, although she was a god of good alignment, the Goddess of Agriculture also had her own limitations. She did not have much ability to mobilize the food here. She could control the resources in the church, but the wealth of the believers was not under her control. Therefore, even if there were refugees everywhere, the goddess of agriculture did not have the spare energy to help. This was exactly the opposite of Sorin's control of the city of Mordor. In the southern principality, it was the secular forces, manor owners, nobles and chambers of commerce that dominated the southern principality. They were willing to serve and believe in the goddess of agriculture, but if they were asked to take out their accumulated wealth to help others, these people might all turn against them in minutes. However, even so, the number of refugees in the southern principality was the smallest. The nobles formed an army to guard against evil creatures and prevent refugees from entering this fertile land. The entire southern principality's farming was two-season, which was incomparable to the outer islands. Almost every town and village here had an altar and temple of the goddess of agriculture. After every harvest, a grand harvest festival would be held here. Sorin's destination was Harvest City. A city protected by the goddess of agriculture should also be the most beautiful city in the material plane. This was a garden-like city. Sorin saw many beautiful manors before he got close. These manors were almost planted with many flowers and plants. It looked like a retro-futuristic city green, but it was much more harmonious and beautiful. This was where the true believers of the goddess of agriculture were. They were called herders by the outside world. Most of them were gardeners, farmers and droll. They pursued the balance of nature and agriculture. Although they served for farming, they still loved nature. The biggest difference in this city was that all the fertile land would not be transformed into farmland. Along the way, Sorin saw many fertile fields, but they were transformed into beautiful gardens by these people. He had to say, the goddess of agriculture did create a dreamlike garden city in the material plane. Sorin walked on the wide and flat road. He was observing the entire Harvest City, and through this observation, the goddess of agriculture's truest thoughts, just like the order, rules and promises of Mordor City. That was Sorin's true thoughts, so it extended to the interior of Mordor City. It was difficult for people who ignored the order to survive in Mordor City. This was the influence of the gods on the secular world. This city also represented the idea of the goddess of agriculture. Because the gods had their own ideas, and this idea was first fed back to the core territory controlled by the church. It seems that the goddess of agriculture advocates the balance of nature and agriculture. Sorin watched all this silently. He could feel the calmness and peace of the goddess of agriculture. She did not want to turn her back on nature, but she could not bear to be hostile to human beings, so she tried to act as a balancer among them. This land retained the beauty of nature. Unlike other places in the southern principality, most of the fertile land had been transformed into farmland as much as possible. There were dense and beautiful forests, small and exquisite gardens, and granaries erected next to the village. In the distance there were dug rivers and streams. This was a beautiful land. To some extent, it was more beautiful than Mordor City, but Sorin felt that it was a bit unreal, especially under the shadow of the Avatar crisis. After seeing the destroyed Amber City and the defeated Whiterun City, he felt that all of this was like a castle in the air. Many people gathered in the village ahead. Sorin approached like a traveler and observed for a while. These people were holding a wedding. Holding a wedding on a freshly plowed field was a very ancient tradition that had been maintained since the time of Mother Earth. Some devout believers would hold a wedding on the freshly plowed land, and then the newlyweds would spend their first night here in the evening. This was an ancient tradition that had been passed down for thousands of years because they could get the blessing of Mother Earth and let their children multiply. The Church of the Goddess of Agriculture still maintained this ancient tradition. The wedding of the couple was presided over by a priest, and the wedding banquet was held next to the field. When night fell, the newlyweds would make their beds on the freshly plowed land, and then they would spend their first night here to get the blessing of Mother Earth. Nature and human beings. This was a difficult problem to reconcile. The conflict between Mother Gaia and Father Oak was because Mother Gaia turned her preference to humans and began to protect agriculture, causing the relationship between the two greater gods to be cold. In the end, a group of believers who served Mother Nature, known as the True Forms, who worshipped the wild and nature of the Druids, began to switch allegiance to the gods of other nature pantheons. For now, these true images served the goddess of the forest. Sorin's arrival couldn't be hidden from the goddess of agriculture, so when he entered Harvest City, the main temple located in the center of the city immediately sent out a large number of priests. Because the Church of the Goddess of Agriculture had many characteristics of motherhood, fertility, and femininity, most of the priests were female members. They gathered in groups to welcome Sorin's arrival, sprinkling fragrant flower petals on both sides of the garden, and then respectfully led Sorin all the way to the temple. No matter what, The visit of a true god was very significant, so these priests used the grandest welcoming ceremony. The temple of the goddess of agriculture was like a beautiful hanging garden. Even as a true god, Soren couldn't help but be shocked when he first saw it, because everything in front of him really did look like the legendary Hanging Garden of Babylon. The whole temple was shrouded in the beauty of humanity and nature. The two balanced and complemented each other, supporting everything in front of him like a dreamy kingdom. There were a large number of believers here, and each believer's face was full of happiness and reverence. It could be seen that their life was very good, because the residents of Mordor only had a proud smile on their faces, not such a calm and happy smile. Soren was invited all the way to the deepest part of the temple. There was a beautiful priest waiting for him there, and then the priest took Soren into a private kingdom. This was a half-bit wall. A beautiful half-bit wall attached to the temple looked like a huge garden, with countless strange flowers and plants blooming in it. In front of it, there was a delicate vine-rocking chair, and the goddess of agriculture was wearing a white dress, sitting quietly on it, watching Soren's arrival. "Welcome to my kingdom." The goddess of agriculture stood up and walked slowly. She came in front of Soren and gently twisted the corner of her dress, then bowed her head slightly and smiled. "What do you think of what I've seen along the way, Sir Soren?" She had already noticed Soren's visit. Soren bowed slightly, then held the goddess of agriculture's hand with his palm, leaned over and kissed the back of her hand gently, but it was just a kiss, and he didn't really touch the other party. Since the goddess of agriculture used the ancient etiquette, he naturally responded to the ancient knight etiquette. In this etiquette, kissing the back of the hand was just a symbol. The most orthodox ceremony was to never touch the skin of the woman because it was very rude. Of course, this etiquette evolved to the point where he really kissed her. Soren looked up and met the goddess of agriculture's eyes and said calmly, "It's beautiful. It's natural. But it's also illusory." Hearing Soren's words, the goddess of agriculture's face changed instantly. Chapter 966. There was a trace of displeasure on the goddess of agriculture's face. She had sacrificed a lot for her beliefs, and Soren's words obviously had a trace of negation to all of this. If it were other gods with a more violent temper, they would have already turned hostile, but she was the goddess of agriculture after all. At this moment, she just quietly looked at Soren, waiting for him to say what he was going to say next. The goddess of agriculture thought that Soren would say a lot of things. But Soren did not do so. He just smiled and sat on the recliner in front of the goddess of agriculture and said calmly, "You should have been to other places, right?" The goddess of agriculture frowned slightly when she heard this. Soren looked at the beautiful scenery around him and smiled. "It's really good here. Much more beautiful than my country. I've traveled to many places along the way and some cities have been completely destroyed. Countless people have been displaced and many people are starving. North of the Agate River, you can see piles of bones everywhere, both human and other creatures. The peace and beauty here is only because the manor owners and nobles have stopped the refugees from approaching. They have been turned away and blocked on the other side of the river." Soren sighed softly and then said, "I don't deny your ideas. It's just that everything you want to create can't be created with the current foundation of civilization in the material plane. If it's just a small place, you should be able to realize your ideas here. But this is only the southern duchy, an insignificant place in the whole continent, and a very small piece of land in the material plane. The area of the southern duchy was not as large as the south coast. It was about 1/30th of the continent's area, and an even more insignificant place in the whole material plane. Arendelle was more than 3 times larger than this place. The influence of the goddess of agriculture had always been limited to this land, and as long as she left this land, her influence would decline sharply. What are you trying to say? The goddess of agriculture's tone was a little unhappy. Soren looked up and met her gaze and said seriously, "You have the most believers in the material plane, and you have also inherited the priesthood of Mother Earth. But have you ever thought about why you haven't been able to advance to a great divine power until now?" Yes. The goddess of agriculture had always been a mid-level divine power. Although she had the most believers in the material plane, the power of her godhead still hadn't improved. If Soren only had a few 100,000 followers, then the goddess of agriculture had at least a few million followers. Almost every race related to agriculture had her followers, but such a large number of followers was still not enough for her to become a greater divine power. The reason was very simple. Although the believers of the goddess of agriculture were huge, the quality was not up to standard. Farmers were the ones who believed in the goddess of agriculture the most. This was a very large base, but this base also meant that their faith was not devout enough. Every farmer would pray to the goddess of agriculture before sowing and harvesting, but that was it. There were too many pan-religious farmers, and it was impossible for 10 pan-religious farmers to lose out to one more devout believer. The goddess of agriculture's priesthood and her church's practices made it impossible for her to cultivate enough fanatics. Therefore, even if she had a large base, the number of fanatics she had was probably less than 1/10 of Soren's. This was also the reason why the goddess of agriculture had not been able to level up for so long. Other than the territory of Harvest City, her church could not fully control the southern duchy. Hearing Soren's words, the goddess of agriculture could not help but fall into deep thought. Soren continued, "I've been to many places along the way, and I can see that although there are your shrines everywhere, these manor owners and nobles only know how to ask for your help. They believe in you not because they really worship you, but because you can bring them a good harvest. I heard that several oracles of the church have been rejected by the nobles recently." The goddess of agriculture had issued an oracle to accept refugees from the outside world, but this oracle was disobeyed and was not carried out at all. The goddess of agriculture's expression was a little uneasy. She said in a cold voice, "Why are you here? Are you just mocking me?" Soren shook his head. He stood up and walked in front of the goddess of agriculture, then stretched out his hand and said softly, "On the contrary, I'm here to seek cooperation, and to help you become a greater divine power. Help me?" The goddess of agriculture looked at Soren in confusion. Soren's priesthood was very different from hers. She did not know how Soren could help her. Civilization. Soren seemed to see the doubts in her heart and said slowly, "Only a strong enough civilization can change all of this. Without enough civilization as a foundation, ignorance and barbarism will never be able to realize your ideals. And I can help you do this." The goddess of agriculture laughed and said with a hint of sarcasm, "Civilization? The civilization of the Arcane Empire?" "No." Soren shook his head and said, "It's more rational than the Arcane Empire. What I want to create is a more harmonious civilization, a peaceful coexistence between man and nature. Although I haven't done it yet, I have seen to what extent I can eventually achieve in the future." The goddess of agriculture fell into deep thought. After a long time she looked up and said softly, "What do you want? What are you going to pay?" Soren looked into her eyes and said seriously, "I need you to form a real alliance with me. And what I'm paying is a vow." "A vow?" The goddess of agriculture looked up with great interest and said, "What vow?" Soren smiled and said seriously, "In the name of the true God, I vow to protect agriculture." Surprise. The goddess of agriculture looked up in surprise and suddenly chuckled playfully, "Are you going to vow to fight for me?" Soren shook his head. He said seriously, "I vow to protect agriculture. To maintain the agriculture civilization. Any existence that destroys or threatens the agriculture civilization will be my enemy. I will help you promote agriculture, protect agriculture, and develop agriculture. I will be your staunchest ally and fight for you when agriculture is threatened." The goddess of agriculture was silent. After a while, she looked at Soren with hesitation and murmured, "Are you serious?" It wasn't that she doubted everything Soren said, but she still couldn't believe it. Because a god of the order evil alignment, an evil god who controlled the power of death and slaughter, would actually agree with agriculture so much. Soren couldn't deceive her with lies, but because it was the truth, she was even more surprised. Agriculture is the cornerstone of everything. Soren nodded slowly and reached out his hand to the goddess of agriculture again, and said calmly, "I'm serious." A smile appeared on her face. The goddess of agriculture quietly looked at Soren in front of her, and then a smile appeared on her beautiful face. She gently held Soren's hand and said slowly, "Okay. I promise you." All this time, the goddess of agriculture didn't have a real fighting god. Whether it was the goddess of spring water and peace, the goddess of river, or the goddess of sprouts, none of these gods under the goddess of agriculture could fight. The agriculture civilization itself was very fragile, and it just so happened that it needed a strong power to protect it. War would destroy agriculture, plunder would destroy agriculture, tyranny would destroy agriculture, and almost all kinds of disasters would bring a heavy blow to agriculture. This was also why the goddess of agriculture could only live in one place. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but she didn't have the ability to expand. Prosperous agriculture was almost always driven by social order, and when turmoil came, agriculture would inevitably weaken. Soren's vow meant that he would fight to protect the agriculture civilization. From now on, all races related to nomadic fishing and hunting would be hostile to him, and tyranny, chaos, turmoil, and war were also enemies he needed to fight against, because these would also destroy agriculture. Soren's vow meant that he would face all the enemies of the goddess of agriculture. A golden light appeared. When Soren and the goddess of agriculture reached a contract, the golden light of divinity had spread, and almost all the gods knew that they had signed an oath of alliance. Although the two gods didn't announce the content of the oath, this kind of oath that all the gods could sense was at least at the level of the pantheon, which meant that they could only make an oath in the name of a true god. At the same time, a short oath also echoed in the ears of the other gods. In the true name of Soren, I swear to protect agriculture. It was a very simple sentence. But the chain reaction was huge. Almost in the blink of an eye, in all the temples that worshipped and served Soren in the entire material plane, there was suddenly an additional wheat emblem. And in all the temples related to the goddess of agriculture, the emblem representing Soren also appeared in them. An alliance of attack and defense. This was the highest level oath of the gods, which meant that the two gods had become the strongest allies. In the half-plane, a divine light appeared, and then a woman with beautiful long hair like a waterfall appeared in front of Soren. She first bowed slightly to the goddess of agriculture, and then smiled and saluted to Soren. Lord Shadow, goddess of spring water and peace, Edis, a lesser god and also a god of the goddess of agriculture. The most hostile god was the god of the hunt, Malor. Perhaps because Malor died in the hands of Soren, she was very friendly to Soren. Then the light of two other gods appeared. After Soren and the goddess of agriculture made an oath, her three gods arrived immediately. The figures of the river goddess and the sprout goddess appeared in the half-plane. They nodded slightly to Soren, and then turned to look at the goddess of agriculture in confusion. All of this was completely unexpected. No one would have thought that Soren and the goddess of agriculture would suddenly make such a high-level alliance. Chapter 967. The three goddesses appeared in the half-bit wall. However, unlike the friendly attitude of the goddess of spring water and the goddess of peace, the river goddess had a cold expression, while the sprout goddess was a little hostile toward Soren. The sprout goddess, Cyania, was an amiable goddess. She often danced and played in the forest, and when she did not have to take care of the little ones in the forest, she played with the forest creatures. Her voice was very deep and resonant, and she was very fond of retorting in conversation with intelligent replies, often with a little coarse insinuation. Her appearance looked like a half-goat, but she had more mysterious and unfathomable characteristics than the latter. This goddess was a member of the natural god system. Legend had it that she was the embodiment of the collective spirituality of the forest spirits. She used to serve Mei Likai together with the unicorn goddess, but later turned to the goddess of agriculture for some reason. Judging from her embodiment, the sprout goddess was about 1.75 meters tall. Her upper body was that of a beautiful woman wearing an emerald green robe. Her lower body was similar to the legs of a goat, and there was a pair of small antelope horns on her forehead. This weak goddess was in charge of the fertility of the forest, as well as many areas related to the forest. After joining the goddess of agriculture, she was actively trying to obtain the fertility priesthood in agriculture. Soren thought for a while and understood why she was a little hostile towards him. It was because Saruman's priesthood seemed to conflict with hers. In the eyes of the other gods, Saruman was obviously an existence that Soren was preparing to cultivate as a god. This is the Shadow Lord, His Excellency Soren. The goddess of agriculture stood up with a smile and said to the three goddesses in front of her, "From today onwards, he is our most important ally." As the main god of a god system, the goddess of agriculture had her own authority. She seemed to be trying to ease the current atmosphere, and the other goddesses also understood this. So under the leadership of the goddess of spring water, the other three goddesses bowed to Soren to show their respect. In terms of divine power level, the three of them together were no match for Soren. Moreover, the goddess of agriculture did not have any fighting gods at all. It was completely dependent on the golden thighs of Mother Earth and the god of light that they could maintain their current influence. However, the goddess of agriculture did not want to always rely on her parents. She hoped that as a true god she could walk her own path. Since everyone is here. Soren's expression was very calm. He did not care about the rejection and wariness of the goddesses, because time would prove everything. He said slowly, "As an ally, I have prepared some plans and gifts for you that can help you increase your divine power." Now that the material plane was becoming more and more turbulent, and the four elemental overgods had appeared, the devils of hell were also becoming restless. I think all of you should be interested in hearing my plan." The three goddesses were puzzled when they heard this, but they still sat down nearby. With a gentle wave of the goddess of agriculture's hand, the flowers and vines on the ground automatically formed three elegant and comfortable rattan chairs. "This is the Wind Spear Hills." Soren waved his hand and a hologram appeared in front of him. The hologram was the actual scene of the Wind Spear Hills. This was the result of the fallen witch's recent research, and it was combined with the High Priest's 3D image. The arcane tower circled around the Wind Spear Hills, scanning and recording the entire map. Soren pointed to the overlooking map of the land in front of him and said, "The Wind Spear Hills is a very fertile land. There are 2 rivers running through this land. From the map, it can be seen that there are still many places in this land that have not been reclaimed. If all these areas in the south are operated, it can support at least 500,000 people. For now, there are about 400,000 refugees on the south coast. Some of them have moved to the island of Moder, but there are still a large number of refugees near the Principality of Rossard and the City of Wealth. I plan to gather all of them and then gather them to the Wind Spear Hills to reclaim the land. The City of Moder will provide the necessary materials and help for this. In accordance with the oath I made, I will also station troops at the border. Turmoil brings destruction and destruction. I am ready to help these mortals rebuild their homes. And this matter also needs your help. I hope you can send priests to the Wind Spear Hills to assist in this matter. Also, recently the City of Moder will hold a grand harvest festival. The scale may reach about 200,000 people. If there is no problem, I hope to make this festival one of the most important festivals in the City of Moder. In the future, there will be a corresponding celebration every year for the harvest." Soren finished his words. The several goddesses present could not help but have their eyes lit up. Soren's plan was not very attractive, but the number he proposed was very tempting. Hundreds of thousands of refugees in one breath. In this desperate situation, as long as there was a little guidance from the priests, these people would become devout believers. Soren asked them to send priests. Obviously he was willing to give up a large number of these people as their believers. Unlike Soren's priesthood, these goddesses' priesthoods were closely related to ordinary people. Most of Soren's priesthoods were related to professions. Such a large number was enough to increase their believers by a large number. The goddess of agriculture was more interested in the harvest festival. A celebration with a scale of 200,000 people was not common in the material plane, because the population was limited. Although Harvest City was lively and bustling, in fact the total population was only around 100,000. Any more and the beautification of the whole city would be ruined. Too many people meant that eating, drinking and shitting would seriously pollute the city's environment. A harvest festival of 200,000 people was enough to provide a large amount of divine power for the goddess of agriculture. At the same time, if this festival became a legal festival in the city of Moder, it meant that Soren officially allowed the goddess of agriculture and her church to enter the sphere of influence of Moder and become an officially and legally recognized church organization. The benefits involved were obviously very tempting. There is no problem with sending priests. But how can you ensure that the cultivated land will not be destroyed? Goddess Shinya suddenly said. Soren glanced at her and slowly said, "I will station about 50,000 troops in the Wind Spear Hills, including some of the main forces of Moder City and the properly trained militia. If there is a war, troops can be sent from Snake Island and Port Tylon at any time." At first, this plan was just to settle them down and let them have land to farm and ensure that they can support themselves. It will take about 10 years to complete it completely. At that time the Avatar crisis would be over. Soren thought so in his heart. The purpose of developing the Wind Spear Hills was to hoard enough people. It didn't need to be planned as well as Moder City. He just needed to ensure that the population here would continue to flow and no one would starve to death. Soren's purpose was to pull the goddess of agriculture onto his pirate ship first. When the Avatar crisis was over, naturally he could plan whatever he wanted. Yes. The goddess of agriculture spoke at this time, smiled and nodded to Soren and said, "I can send a group of priests at any time. I also believe that you have the ability to protect agriculture. But I also have a request." Soren raised his head and said, "What request?" The goddess of agriculture drew a circle on the map, which was about 3,000 square kilometers, including the fertile land upstream of the river and a large area of dense forest, and said seriously, "All this land belongs to our church." Secular and church. It seemed that the goddess of agriculture had also learned her lesson. She knew very well that she could not have enough influence in the southern principality because the church itself did not have much land. These lands belonged to nobles and merchants. The goddess of agriculture only had influence but no decision-making power. She was ready to make some changes in her heart, but in order to do so, she must also have certain resources in the secular world. What Soren did in Motor City made her want to test it herself. She wanted to know if more things could be done if the church controlled more resources and power in the secular world. Soren fell into deep thought when he heard this. The other three goddesses also looked thoughtful. Although the gods had great power, most of their influence on the secular world was determined by the church. Soren's behavior was unusual among the gods, because everything he did was a bit similar to ***** at first, and then Soren separated all this, but the influence on the church was quite amazing. Yes. Soren thought seriously and nodded, all these lands belong to your church. But the people still belong to the Windspear Hills. It seemed that the goddess of agriculture had also learned her lesson. So what if she was a god? Even if she was powerful and superior? But these good gods couldn't force the mortals to hand over food, wealth, and land, could they? Why was the goddess of agriculture always frustrated? The reason was simple. All the oracles she issued were just words. The church itself did not control the southern duchy, and the final implementation was completely up to the nobles. The goddess of agriculture had a large number of droll and priests, but for a long time she had been creating wealth for nobles and merchants. The resources of the church itself were actually limited to the vicinity of Harvest City. No resources, no money. Even if the gods wanted to do something, it would be very difficult. The wealth was in their own hands, in the hands of the church, and it was just a matter of saying a word to accept refugees and expand their faith. But if the wealth was in the hands of the nobles and merchants, they would pay to accept refugees and help the church expand its influence. Even the most noble ideals would be able to persuade them. It seemed that the goddess of agriculture had realized that only the resources controlled by the church could be directly mobilized. Other believers, even the nobles who believed in her devoutly, would hesitate to implement it. Hearing that Soren had agreed to the request, the other goddesses' expressions became a lot more friendly. Although the gods didn't care about the wealth of the mortal world, the mortals cared a lot about it. And this large piece of land was enough for them to build another parish. The good gods couldn't just plunder at will. They needed a legitimate way to expand their parish and influence. Chapter 968. Perhaps it was because Soren had agreed to their request. The goddesses seemed to be in a good mood. After all, Soren was a guest from afar. The goddess of agriculture thought about it and decided to hold a banquet to entertain him. It was very easy for the gods to hold banquets, and there was no need to bother those mortals at all. As the goddess of agriculture clapped her hands gently, a group of lovely flower fairies flew out of the lush forest in front of her. They were only the size of a palm, like pocket-sized little fairies. These flower fairies brought honey and fruit. The goddess of river picked up a conch and blew towards the river, and more than 10 beautiful water fairies came out. They were holding plates made of beautiful shells, and there were all kinds of aquatic products on them. The goddess of spring water tapped gently on the ground with her snow-white toes, and immediately, a clear and sweet spring water automatically turned into a small fountain, shining with colorful brilliance under the sun. The goddess of sprouts summoned a large group of gorgeous birds, and they played a music movement with all kinds of chirps. Soren was a little stunned. In fact, although he was the owner of Mordor City and a mid-level divine power god, he had never experienced the enjoyment of a god-level god. Many nobles lived much more luxurious lives than him. As for using divine power to hold a banquet, he had never studied a similar spell. Looking at the extremely skillful movements of the goddesses, as if everything was so natural, it was obvious that it was not the first time these goddesses had used similar spells. It seemed that the rumors were true, and the gods of this world were really good at enjoying life. It was said that some gods had also developed the banquet spell. As long as they cast a 6-circle or 7-circle spell, they could automatically create a large amount of wine, food, chairs, and even a garden square out of thin air. Soren felt that if he had time, he should also learn the extra-dimensional mansion spell. The banquet did not take up too much of Soren's time. The goddess of agriculture was a very active person. In the afternoon of the same day, the goddess of agriculture conveyed an oracle to the church, and then many priests and droll in the southern duchy were summoned. There were a large number of priests and droll under the command of the goddess of agriculture. They were good at cultivating plants and were all experienced gardeners and farmers. These people originally served many nobles and merchants, and some of them were manor owners themselves. Under the oracle of the goddess of agriculture, many priests and droll, who were originally aristocratic advisors, came to Harvest City, and then began to go to the Wind Spear Hills under the arrangement of the church. Devout believers would not disobey the oracle, so hundreds of droll and priests set off on the same day. At this time, the nobles of the southern duchy quickly got the news, and they could not sit still. Their harvest, they were completely dependent on the goddess of agriculture. Was a little worried that the goddess of agriculture was dissatisfied with them. So they planned to pay a certain price to keep these priests and druids, but they were soon rejected because the covenant of the gods was not a joke. Since the goddess of agriculture had agreed to Soren's request, it was useless even if these people were willing to pay a higher price. Wind Spear Hills, Maple City. The light of a teleportation gate appeared. The first to come out was a mature and elegant white-robed priest with the emblem of the goddess of agriculture on her chest. She was a legendary archbishop. The one in charge of receiving her was Adele Isabella, and behind her was another noble woman who looked somewhat similar to her. Adele nodded slightly to the archbishop in front of her and said in a friendly manner, "My lord has arranged everything. Please come with me, we have arranged temporary accommodations for you in the mayor's mansion. The temple is under construction, and it will be completed in about a week." The first batch of priests had a total of 12 people, all of whom were high-grade priests, led by an archbishop. Then there were 3 other independent droll. Many of the priests of the goddess of agriculture were part-time droll, and they were all experts in controlling plants. The archbishop smiled and nodded, "No hurry. Can you show us around?" Adele Isabella smiled and said, "There's no problem at all. Let's go to the temple area first." The archbishop's purpose was simple. She needed to see the sincerity of Mordor City and its strength. Although the goddess agreed to cooperate with the Shadow Lord, the specific progress of the trial and the number of priests needed to be sent over would depend on the actual situation. A church had its own rules to operate. Unless the value here was amazing, she would not advocate sending a large number of priests from the southern duchy to the Wind Spear Hills. The temple area. As a city that was not too big, there were only a few temples in the temple area of Maple City, and they were all remodeled. The most obvious one was the Temple of the Shadow Lord, then the temple of his god, the Whipping Girl, and then the temple of the goddess of wealth. The other temples were not seen, and the one currently under construction was the temple of the goddess of agriculture. In charge of the construction of the temple was a group of half-elves, including witches. They were responsible for controlling more than 20 clay golems, and most of the physical labor was done by them. The main body of the temple was made of white marble. At present, only the framework of the building was completed, and there were still many open spaces nearby that had not been transformed. This temple covers an area of 5,000 square meters, and 1/3 of it is currently used. Adele smiled and introduced to the group of priests behind her, "We are only responsible for the main framework. How to arrange and transform the temple will be done by you. After all, each temple has different characteristics." The archbishop looked at everything in front of her in surprise. With just a glance, she knew that the cost of building this temple was not cheap. Just the marble alone cost a lot. Even in the southern duchy, such a temple would require at least a bishop to preside over it. After a while she frowned. She felt that she needed to mobilize people quickly because the temples built by these half-elves were not in line with the beauty of the goddess of agriculture at all. There was no harmonious beauty of balance between nature and people. She said a few words to a droll behind her and then said to Adele, "Since this is a temple to serve our Lord, we'd better send people to help. This is Master Callie. He knows how to arrange this temple. You have built a lot, but some places are not in line with our Lord's preferences." The characteristic of the city of Mordor was its magnificence. So the specifications of the temple were also based on this, but the temple of the goddess of agriculture was very delicate. The archbishop felt that he should send people to participate in advance, otherwise it would be too troublesome to transform later. "No problem." Adele smiled. Then she took the group to the commercial and residential areas, and finally came to the refugee shed outside, where a large number of refugees had gathered. "For now." Adele pointed to the refugee shed in front of her and said, "We have taken in about 6,000 refugees, all of them with families, which is easier to manage. These people will be used to reclaim the land, and all the tools and seeds will be provided by the city of Mordor. But they need you to send people to take charge of management and teaching. There is a lot of wasteland nearby. As long as it is reclaimed, it should be self-sufficient next year. According to our calculations, the city can expand to the size of 50,000 people. The current population is more than 18,000 people, so we can still take in about 32,000 refugees. A city of 50,000 people. The archbishop and the others looked at each other with a surprised expression, because other cities had about 30,000 people, and 50,000 people was already considered a big city. The fact that the city of Mordor could calculate such a scale meant that they were very confident in the management of the city. Even if it was such a small city, they were confident that they could complete the material deployment and attack of 50,000 people. At the same time, the archbishop also found that many places in the city were being transformed. The most obvious were the sewers and ditches, and the roads near the market were also being repaved. The archbishop looked around and suddenly said, "Why are there gray dwarfs here?" Not far away there seemed to be a blacksmith shop. About a dozen gray dwarfs were busy. They were drinking and working, often picking up the jug after a fierce knock. Adele smiled and said, "These are the residents of the city of Mordor. They are blacksmiths who are good at forging. At present, the farming tools for the refugees are made by them. In the future, the weapons of the city guards will also be provided by them. These gray dwarfs will not live in this city. After completing these works, they will return to Mordor. After all." At this point, Adele smiled and pointed out, "This kind of excellent blacksmith is also in high demand in Mordor." The Durgar's weapons were all refined ironware. The city of Mordor seemed to have a lot of steel resources. The archbishop only glanced at them and found that the quality of these farming tools was very good. Most of them were steel rather than pig iron. A priest picked up the weapon and looked at it. He could not help but exclaim, "It is indeed a fine product." The gray dwarfs did not like to deal with outsiders. The bearded gray dwarf just snorted when he heard the words, and then continued to do his own thing. If it were not for the great Shadow Lord's request, they would not have come to this broken place. There was no good wine or super large furnace here. It was much worse than Mordor. Maple City is expected to recruit 3,000 troops. Adele glanced at the archbishop in front of her and smiled. After all, this is a very special time. So we hope that the Church of Agriculture can also provide some manpower. Of course, we will provide all the weapons and equipment. One word. Rich and powerful. Adele's every word expressed the wealth of Mordor City, as if she didn't care about this expenditure at all. In fact, she did not care, because Soren's plan to lay out the bottomless abyss had already begun to pay off. A steady stream of steel and rare minerals were being imported from the bottomless abyss into Mordor, and this expenditure was just a drop in the bucket. P.S. The first update. Chapter 969. Roping in the goddess of agriculture was only part of Soren's plan. After returning from Harvest City, his second target was the already dilapidated City of Wealth. Soren's visit was also a big event for the City of Wealth, but he didn't alert anyone. Instead, he quietly entered the deepest part of the Temple of Wealth. There were 2 saint priests guarding the place. If there was a word to describe the Temple of Wealth, then there was no doubt that it was magnificent. The whole temple looked like it was shining with golden light, and the walls were even inlaid with gems as decorations. However, there shouldn't be any blind thieves coming here because it was simply suicidal. In the magnificent temple, Soren saw the body of the goddess of wealth. It wasn't surprising that the goddess of wealth was hiding in this city. After all, this was her headquarters. The appearance of the goddess of wealth was that of an elegant and graceful noble lady. She had beautiful blonde hair and wore a light golden lace dress. There was a beautiful huge jade necklace on her full chest and a pebble-sized gem in her hairband. She wore all kinds of expensive jewelry rings on her fingers. Her golden shawl was painted with many patterns, and her boots were made of golden silk that were inlaid with many pearls. She looked like a walking golden beauty with a lot of jewelry. The goddess loved gold. Almost everything she liked had the brilliance of gold and jewelry. For Soren's arrival, the goddess seemed very friendly, at least on the surface. Goddess of Wealth, Joaquin. Almost every goddess of wealth had this name. However, unlike the previous goddess of wealth, the current goddess of wealth was a young and hard-working goddess. She was full of vitality and vigor. She loved wealth very much, not for its value but for its use. She loved the hustle and bustle of the market, and she loved bargaining. She was in charge of all the transactions on the table and under the table, including legitimate transactions and black market transactions. Although she was interested in carrying out reforms, she sometimes showed a stubborn side, which sometimes caused her to run into some trouble. The goddess of wealth's alignment was absolutely neutral. In other words, the goddess could cooperate with any god, whether it was a good god or an evil god. Devotees of Joaquin traveled all over the world, assisting merchants in their dealings and serving Joaquin shrines in major cities. The shrine of Joaquin was usually the local financing center, currency exchange center, and storage place. They also provided a channel to sell the stolen goods in private. All of their activities were for the sake of obtaining wealth. The clergy of Joaquin were required to pay a quarter of their income to the church and were obligated to invest in profitable businesses run by other devout believers. On the surface, the Church of Joaquin seemed to disdain the use of rumors, monopolies, and hiring bandits to manipulate trade. They criticized these methods and always denied that they had committed them. However, in private, they demanded that their pastors use these methods in the most secretive way so that no one would suspect that they had anything to do with the church. Being able to accumulate your own wealth was seen as a synonym for success in the church. Of course, the premise was that the money had to be earned through investments and not through improper means. To a certain extent, the philosophy of the Church of Joaquin was very similar to that of modern society, which was the typical worship of money. Wealth was seen as a symbol of success. A person who could make money and have a lot of money could easily achieve a high enough position in the church. The devotees of Joaquin didn't care about the methods, and they also used a lot of dirty tricks, but they still maintained their glamour on the surface. "Welcome," said Wang Yao. The goddess of Joaquin smiled and greeted Soren, and behind her, 5 beautiful Holy Spirit maidens gradually appeared. Lord Shadow. These 5 Holy Spirits were very famous. They were beautiful, powerful, and ambitious women when they were alive. These women were the top merchants, the best diplomats, and also abnormally powerful professionals. They were known as the 5 Fierce Women when they were alive, and their names were still remembered today: Berensta Therius, Della Isgil, Felicia Galbruce, Helena Giasia, and Sarilatai Brantin. They were the most important members of the Church of Joaquin, the Golden. The strength of an old god could be seen from the Holy Spirits behind them. Although the goddess of wealth wasn't very powerful, she had a lot of resources. The 5 maidens quickly arranged a long table and chairs in the temple, and it was almost as luxurious as possible. Pure gold wine glasses and utensils were inlaid with gems, and huge pearls were placed in front of the eyes as decorations. Even the richest king in the mortal world couldn't compare to this. Soren smiled and sat down. He looked at the goddess of Joaquin in front of him and said, "I'm here this time in the hope of forming an alliance with you. Of course. I also have a very good idea to discuss with you." The goddess of Joaquin smiled and looked at Soren with a slightly playful expression. She was a tall and slender beauty, just like the most famous and luxurious lady. She said, "What do you think, Lord Shadow? You have just been to Harvest City, haven't you?" Soren smiled and took the wine glass from the maidservant. He tasted the wine, then smiled and said, "Yes. I have just formed an alliance with the goddess of agriculture." Joaquin's expression was thoughtful. Soren looked at the goddess in front of him and said directly, "I plan to build a bank. A bank in the truest sense of the word. Let's start with Mordor City, so I think Lady Joaquin should be interested in this." Joaquin's expression changed slightly when she heard this. Then she smiled and said, "I don't know what Lord Soren thinks. If you don't mind, maybe you can tell me." Beck. Just by hearing the name, it must be related to her priesthood. After that, the goddess of wealth waved her hand and signaled the 5 maidservants to leave. Soren thought for a moment, then began to slowly describe. He didn't talk about how to build a bank, but the role of a bank and its future prospects. To some extent, Soren described the bank of the future, a bank that everyone needed, that could be used in any transaction, and a very important role for deposits. The current level of civilization. Most ordinary people didn't have extra wealth, so naturally, it was impossible for them to save money. At most, it was needed by nobles and merchants, but most of the time they protected themselves. Soren described a different situation. An era where everyone had extra wealth and everyone needed to save money in a bank. Joaquin listened quietly, but later her expression became more and more excited, as if she had seen the scene described by Soren. She could almost foresee that if all this was achieved, her power would become stronger and stronger, and she would almost certainly enter the realm of great divine power. At this time, Soren proposed an alliance agreement. Without any hesitation, the goddess of wealth simply agreed, because she knew very well that it was impossible to achieve everything described by Soren with her own power. This was a mutually beneficial cooperation. She had what Soren needed, and Soren had what she needed. This alliance was not as strong as the goddess of agriculture's. Soren didn't ask for an alliance agreement because he couldn't trust Joaquin as much as he did the goddess of agriculture, and the goddess of wealth didn't see the real benefits, so she might not be willing to risk everything with Soren. However, unsurprisingly, Soren persuaded her. At least the prospect of everyone having wealth, everyone needing to use a bank, and anyone could become her believer convinced her. The goddess of wealth couldn't resist this temptation at all. If all this could be done, her believers would no longer be limited to merchants, and everyone would be closely related to her clergy. So, the goddess of wealth seemed to be a little impatient. Sir Soren, when will our plan start? Soren smiled and shook his head. No hurry. Building a bank is not an easy task. It requires enough power and credibility. And at present, the mortals haven't accumulated much wealth. From the current situation in the material plane, only Moder, Port Tylon, Shipwreck Bay and Arendelle have the ability to build a bank. It will take some time to prepare. And we need strong enough armed forces. After all, there are many dragons in the material plane. The biggest trouble in building a bank was nothing else. Yes, it's those damn dragons. These pure-blooded dragons who couldn't control their brains at the sight of wealth and gold were definitely the biggest enemies of the bank when they went crazy. Maybe these dragons didn't dare to offend Soren and the goddess of wealth, but when the wealth accumulated to a certain extent, even the ancient dragons might lose their minds. Maybe they weren't opponents of the two gods, but if the bank was opened in other places, these dragons were likely to attack places they couldn't care less about. 10,000 Kindler, maybe the dragons didn't care. 100,000 Kindler, maybe the dragons were just tempted. But when 1,000,000 Kindler were piled up together, these dragons were probably already thinking about how to act. The bank must not make a mistake. Not even a little possibility. So this plan needed enough time to prepare. And Soren couldn't issue paper money at present. In the current background of civilization and turbulent times, Soren had never considered the issue of paper money. Hearing Soren's words, the goddess of wealth fell into deep thought. Okay. Joaquin looked up and said, "This does indeed need a detailed plan." As if thinking of something, the goddess of wealth suddenly turned her eyes and her gaze fell on Soren. Then she smiled elegantly, slightly lifted the corner of her skirt and leaned over, revealing her seductive cleavage in front of Soren. She said playfully, "I think there are still a lot of things to discuss about this plan. Why don't Sir Soren stay here tonight and we can have a long talk tonight? Maybe our relationship can be closer to each other." Soren was slightly surprised, but then he gladly accepted the invitation of the goddess of wealth. P.S. Second update. Chapter 970. Mordor City, Redwater Town. This land was close to the sea. Whenever there was a catch, there would be a large number of red fish swimming back. The nearby rivers were all red, which was how the name came about. At this time it was already August. Because the time of town construction was different, the wheat harvest was also early and late, and Redwater Town was the last batch of harvested towns. At this time, most of the food had been dried and collected, and a man dressed as an official was going door to door with his entourage to count. Mordor City had its own rules. All the food sales could not be done privately. The surplus food was uniformly purchased, and then the city hall would stabilize the price. The price of food was set according to the market price. At first it was very smooth, but there was a little disturbance when they received the second row. Not for sale. My family has a large population, so we consume a lot of food. It was a man dressed as a rich businessman who spoke a northern dialect. At this moment, his small eyes squinted and looked around. It seemed that he was arguing with the official in front of him. Peter frowned and looked at the man in front of him. His purchase of food had been very smooth, but he didn't expect to encounter trouble here. He glanced at the servant behind the man and said, "How many people do you have in your family? How much food do you consume? What is this year's harvest? Come, bring me the file of his registration." So, the attendant took a file from the mayor. Peter just glanced at it and couldn't help laughing. He said, "There are only 12 people in your family. Can you eat so much food? I heard that you have acquaintances in the port. Are you planning to sell food privately?" Speaking of this, Peter's expression suddenly became cold. The rich businessman broke out in a cold sweat when he heard this. He didn't want to sell food. He just wanted to hoard it. Now the world was getting chaotic. The price of food had been rising. If there was a way to transport it out and sell it, it would be the best. But this thing couldn't be said openly because Mordor City had recently introduced a new law. All the food was strictly prohibited from private sales, otherwise they would go to jail. Peter had seen a lot of such people along the way. At this time he said without hesitation, "Food is purchased at the market price. Hoarding and private sales are strictly prohibited. Violators will have their fields confiscated and sent to hard labor. After saying that, Peter didn't hold back and directly ordered people to get the food. Then, after calculating for a moment, he threw a bag of silver coins in front of the other party. This is Mordor City. Peter thought for a moment and came before the rich merchant in front of him. He said in a deep voice, "It's not the northern territory nor is it the southern sea. The first thing you have to learn here is to abide by the rules. Otherwise you will definitely have to pay the price." Ever since the city hall had requested for a unified management of food, they had encountered a lot of trouble. Some people wanted to stockpile food, fearing that prices would rise in the future. Some people planned to secretly transport the grain out and sell it because of this year's bumper harvest and the increase in grain prices. For this kind of situation, the officials of Mordor City had always been unreasonable, because the current policy was food control. Those who were unwilling to sell food because they were dissatisfied with the price of Mordor City were all captured to do hard labor. Sauron's rule was never blindly benevolent, and there were many evil people among the officials of Mordor. They would follow the rules, but their methods were cold enough. This year the price of food on the mainland had been rising. Many of the first batch of people who harvested in Mordor City, whether they were civilians or rich merchants, had the intention to transport the food outside to sell. In this case, the city hall's measure was compulsory purchase. At this time, there was no need for any reason at all because without Mordor City, they would not have what they had now. If they could not count on their gratitude, they could only use the law to maintain it. At the same time, in the port area of Mordor City, ships full of food were also ready to go. This year, Mordor City ushered in a bumper harvest, but all the food was forcibly purchased by the city hall at the market price. At this time, these ships full of food were ready to go out to sea, and the fleet would transport them all the way to the Windspear Hills. This time the government order had little impact on ordinary people. Because the price of Mordor City had always been stable, the merchants were the ones who were most affected. They expected to earn double or even triple the price by selling food privately. However, everything in Mordor City was to serve Sauron. In the face of the general trend of developing the Windspear Hills, anyone who had their own plans would be crushed. The city lord's mansion. The dissatisfaction of the merchants was passed to Gloria through some channels, but after learning about this matter, Gloria just said lightly, "Catch a few leaders and deal with them." The plan of the Windspear Hills could not be interfered with. Gathering refugees meant a large consumption of food, and in the future they would need Mordor City to provide a steady stream of supplies. For these merchants who only wanted to make profits, Gloria did not mind catching a few examples and killing them. A small episode did not have much impact. However, some people still found some clues from the clues. Mordor City had implemented a food control decree, and then other supplies seemed to be restricted to a certain extent. Some smart people had realized that Mordor City seemed to be going to war because the city hall was stocking up on supplies. The Chamber of Commerce, which had been a little restless, immediately calmed down because Mordor City had never been soft-hearted when killing people during the war. Windspear Hills border. These ragged refugees were sent to shacks that stretched for several miles. They would wait here for 3 days. First, they would be checked for diseases, then they would count the population, register their names, and then they would be sent to other places in the Windspear Hills. In just 3 days, the Windspear Hills had taken in nearly 15,000 refugees. And this number was still increasing. Because of the news of relief, refugees from the entire southern region were approaching here. The priests sent by the Church of Agriculture had reached more than 100 people. Similarly, the goddess of river and the goddess of sprouts had also sent priests. They were responsible for guiding the irrigation of ditches. After a simple rest, these refugees were thrown into busy work. Digging ditches, reclaiming land, repairing roads and building walls. In order to deal with the next impact of the Avatar crisis, Mordor City sent a large number of clay golems to prepare to build walls in the south and north of the Windspear Hills. At the same time, more than 10,000 permanent legions would be stationed in these two places. The population under Sauron's control increased sharply. The Windspear Hills itself had a population of more than 100,000. And after accepting a large number of refugees, the number soon exceeded 200,000. According to this progress, the population under the control of Mordor City and the Windspear Hills would soon exceed 1 million. The expanding population meant a steady stream of believers. The number of refugees accepted quickly expanded to more than 30,000 people. Many of these people gave up their original gods and turned to Sauron and the goddess of agriculture. The faith of ordinary people was not solid. With a little guidance, it was possible for them to believe in other gods. In the period before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the priests in the churches of the gods did the most to win faith and expand the influence of the gods. Soren's believers increased by tens of thousands in a short period of time, and it was still increasing. The large-scale agricultural reclamation also brought benefits to the goddess of agriculture. Her clergy was closely related to all of this. With a little guidance, she could gain a lot of faith. All the plans were being carried out in an orderly manner. A bank opened by the goddess of wealth had also recently appeared in Mordor City. At present, it only accepted deposits and did not charge any fees. With a voucher, one could exchange at other wealth temples on the south coast at any time. Bottomless Abyss Shadow Kingdom. In front of a magnificent temple, thousands of demon hunters were ready. Since controlling 2/3 of the land in the Kingdom of God, the heroic spirits in the Kingdom of God had temporarily slowed down their expansion. A large number of potential petitioners were transformed into new forms of demon hunters. At this time, most of the heroic spirits in the Kingdom of God had become demon hunters, and the number had reached thousands. Metals from the Forgotten Land were continuously sent into the Kingdom of God. These resources were forged into weapons and armor under the day and night work of the petitioners. At this time, the combat legion in the Kingdom of God had expanded to more than 10,000 people. Unlike the army in Mordor City, most of the petitioners in the Kingdom of God were middle-grade and high-grade professions. There were almost no cannon fodder among them. Golumba Arena. Since joining the evil gods, Baelor Sauron seemed to have stopped his expansion plan, but he still continued to gather demons. Some were sent to the mining area to work hard, and others were thrown into the battle to eliminate the undead. Almost every day, thousands of dretches were sent into the barracks of Golumba Arena. Then 90% of the dretches died in battle, and most of the survivors advanced. This was an extremely cruel elimination rule. In just half a month, tens of thousands of dretches had died, but what followed was the birth of more middle-grade demons. Now the worms near the Abyss blood pool had been reduced by half. Under the crazy extraction of Sauron, even the demons transformed by the Abyss blood pool could not keep up with the consumption rate. At this time, the demonic army in the Garuba Arena had expanded to a size of about 50,000 people, and half of them were middle-ranked demons. These demons were gathered in the military camp, and in the magnificent forge, the demons and goblins were supervising the laborers as they worked hard, continuously forging weapons and equipment for them. The smell of war was coming. Almost everyone expected that the demon lord Sauron was preparing for a big battle, but they could not determine the target of the attack. Time passed little by little. Just as August was coming to an end, a great temple was suddenly built in Mordor to serve the goddess of agriculture. At the same time, a dazzling divine light also rose from the temple. This was a light that mortals could not see, but gods and legendary professions could sense it. This was a temple favored by the goddess of agriculture. Shrouded in golden light, a beautiful woman also stepped into the depths of the temple. On this day, the goddess of agriculture came to Mordor in person and lived in the great temple that Sauron prepared for her. Thousands of druids and high-grade priests came to Mordor City overnight. On the surface, they were preparing for the biggest harvest celebration of Mordor City, but they were secretly guarding against any possible attacks with the Shadow Shrine. On this day, Sauron left Mordor and went to the Abyss. According to the content of the True Gods Covenant, the goddess of agriculture would replace Sauron in Mordor for the next half a month. P.S. First update. Chapter 971. What? Harvest celebration? In the magnificent palace, a woman with an extremely charming appearance was sitting on the throne. She was wearing a scarlet dress and looked like a beautiful and poisonous enchantress. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife looked down at the man kneeling on one knee in front of her and frowned. Why did Mordor City suddenly plan to have such a grand harvest celebration? Are they going to please the goddess of agriculture? Send people to continue to pay attention to the movements of Mordor City. Let General Kutra come in to see me. After that, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife rubbed her forehead tiredly. She never dreamed that Sauron, who she didn't care about at first, would become a god, and now he had become the Lord of Shadows. She missed the opportunity to eliminate him when he was at his weakest. Now Sauron had become her most terrifying and dangerous enemy. Every time she thought of Sauron's existence, she couldn't help but tremble slightly, and a trace of fear appeared in her heart. If it weren't for the Principality of Rossard in the inland area and the support of the Duke of Bator Inferno, she would have been destroyed by Mordor City long ago. But even so, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had been carefully paying attention to everything in Mordor City. There were many people like her. Although they were far away in the outer islands, every move in Mordor City affected the hearts of countless people. Soon a burly general came in. After seeing the other party, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife couldn't help rubbing her forehead. After all, her rule was not legitimate. This world had its own rules. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife stole the power of the Principality of Rossard, but she also lost the support of many nobles. Although she now controlled most of the land of the Principality of Rossard, there were many nobles who openly opposed her. There were also many nobles who supported her on the surface, but secretly provided supplies to the rebels. In particular, there was a big trouble recently. That was, the goddess of protection of the nobles seemed to be very unfriendly to her. She thought that she had destroyed the order of the nobles. This goddess was not a very powerful existence, but if a god was openly hostile to her, it was enough to cause her great trouble. In particular, the goddess of nobility, Shinewood, had a very wide influence in the ruling class of the material plane. If she did not acknowledge the rule of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, most of the rulers of the material plane would not respect her. Instead, they would think that she had destroyed the legacy of the nobles. General Kutra was a powerful legendary warrior, but he was also a ruthless butcher. If there was a better candidate, Madame Duke of Red Dragon would never let such a ruthless person lead her army. But at the moment she didn't have a better choice. Mordor City was holding a grand harvest celebration, which meant that Mordor City was unlikely to go to war for a while. This gave the Duke of Red Dragon's wife a very important chance to catch her breath. She was ready to take this opportunity to pacify the rebels in the Principality of Rossard. Now, the number of rebel forces had expanded to 3. There were already more than 20 nobles who openly opposed her rule, and these nobles even found an illegitimate son of Duke Rossard in some corner of the country. Almost all of Duke Rossard's sons were killed by the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. An illegitimate son originally had no right of inheritance, but the rumors of Madame Duke of Red Dragon's collusion with the devil seriously damaged her rule. Even if it was just an inconspicuous illegitimate son, with the support of these nobles, it was also possible to get the legitimate right of inheritance. Mordor City. After giving an order to General Kutra, Madame Duke of Red Dragon went to the balcony. She looked in the direction of the sea as if she was looking at the city of Mordor in the distance and murmured, "What should I do next? Defeat Sauron? That's almost impossible. Even if it's the Queen of Yuma herself, it's unlikely. If it goes on like this, I'm afraid I'll be defeated by those nobles. No, I have to find a way out for myself." On the surface, Mordor City seemed to be preparing for the grandest harvest celebration in history. This celebration was not only held in Mordor City, but also near the Windspear Hills, Shipwreck Bay and Port Tylon. There were more than 200,000 people participating in Mordor City alone, and the other places added up to hundreds of thousands of people. Many people thought that Sauron was trying to please the goddess of agriculture and get an ally with a strong background for himself. But in fact that was exactly the case. However, Sauron's real purpose was concealed. The abnormal material movement in Mordor City made people realize that Sauron was preparing to start a war, but many people did not think that Sauron would attack any place during the harvest celebration. And similarly, the army of Mordor City did not have any abnormal movements. It could only be regarded as gathering materials to prepare for future wars. Almost no one thought that Sauron's purpose was not in the material plane, but the frequently mobilized materials were also sent to the bottomless abyss. What Sauron really wanted to do was bolder than they thought. Even the crazy Queen of Spiders could not predict that Sauron would attack the Kingdom of Fear during the Avatar crisis. Am I going to die? In the deep darkness, a thin figure was staggering forward. His body was covered with all kinds of wounds. If he was an ordinary person he would have died long ago. But a powerful force was still tenaciously supporting his life. Not far away, the low roar of a demon could be heard. There was also a terrifying aura of fear. The Slaughterer was tracking his tracks. These monsters were level 21 and above. Even a high-grade demon would not dare to face them alone. They were strange creatures that were completely under the control of madness. In the abyss, they were existences that were feared and repelled. The ugly monkey gasped as he approached a cliff. His life force was very weak, and there were hundreds of high-grade demons behind him. In such a situation, it was almost impossible for him to survive. It seems that it is impossible to leave this country alive. The ugly monkey bit the dagger with his teeth and pulled out the bone spur on his back that pierced his kidney. This was a mark left by a slayer, but the enemy also died in his counterattack. At this time the ugly monkey's body was full of holes. A large number of high-grade demons were not something a rogue could deal with alone. If there was no divine power he would have died long ago. But even if there was divine power, it was impossible for him to walk out of this land alive. There were thousands of demons outside. A large number of petitioners of the Lord of Fear were looking for him. Cough cough. The ugly monkey gasped and sat on a rock. Behind him was a cliff hundreds of meters high. His breathing had become more and more difficult, and his strength was diminishing with the loss of blood. The ugly monkey looked into the distance and could see that hundreds of demons had found his trace and were rushing here quickly. Fortunately, my lord's mission has been completed. Facing the approaching demons and petitioners, the ugly monkey smiled a little ferociously. He made a dirty gesture to these demons, then turned around and jumped down from the cliff hundreds of meters high. Late August 1677. The best believer of Soren, the most promising rookie in Mordor City, the legendary rogue, Ugly Monkey, died while carrying out a mission to spy on the Kingdom of Fear. The Throne of Fear has been locked, and the mission has been successfully completed. P.S. Second update. Chapter 972. The ugly monkey was dead. When his figure jumped down from the cliff that was hundreds of meters high, it meant that his life had left him. Bang! The body of the ugly monkey fell into the dark canyon. The body that was full of holes finally breathed its last breath, and then the light of a soul emerged. The shadow of the ugly monkey emerged from the body. His expression was very blank, as if he didn't have his own consciousness at all. Even legendary professions would enter a state of chaos at the moment of death. The ugly monkey didn't know himself and didn't have his own consciousness. This state would gradually recover with the time of death. When the soul reached the underworld, many memories would be recovered. But this was the god's kingdom of fear, which belonged to the gods. Therefore no god of death came to this world. The god's kingdom was the private world of the gods. If one died here, they wouldn't be attracted by the river Styx, and no messenger of the god of death would come to pick them up. If no one took him out, the soul of the ugly monkey would wander in this god's kingdom until he was completely assimilated by the god's kingdom and turned into a killer with the strength of a legendary professions. However, Soren couldn't give up on the ugly monkey. At the moment when the ugly monkey died, a powerful divine power invaded this god's kingdom, and then a crack appeared in the void. A golden light emerged. A huge palm appeared in the sky. This palm was dozens of meters long and was completely made of golden divine power. It fell from the sky and grabbed the soul of the ugly monkey. Then it directly broke the plane barrier and left the god's kingdom of fear. At the same time, inside the god's kingdom of shadow, a large number of petitioners and believers gathered in front of the temple. The person in charge was the promoted Saint Cardinal. Tens of thousands of petitioners gathered in front of the temple to pray. The divine light made of the power of faith here was shrouded by a force. It converged into a golden light pillar that rose and broke through the sky. A crack appeared. Then the huge golden palm appeared again. A soul was put down from the sky by the huge golden hand and fell into the golden light pillar above the temple. Soren still couldn't enter the god's kingdom. But as the Avatar crisis entered the later stage, his sense of the god's kingdom became stronger and stronger. Soren used his divine power to form a giant hand and placed the ugly monkey's soul on top of the temple. Following that, the power of faith poured in from all directions. He had no intention of sending the ugly monkey into the pool of reincarnation. He wanted to use his divine power to reconstruct the ugly monkey's body as a reward for this devout and loyal follower. In my name, I grant thee the authority of a god. Thou art my messenger. Control the power of a rogue. Soren's majestic voice reverberated throughout the divine kingdom. An enormous amount of faith gathered and began to reforge Ugly Monkey's body. His soul was gradually distorted, and under the infusion of divinity, his soul began to evolve bit by bit. A black shadow appeared. Ugly Monkey's body turned into the form of a demon hunter. Black wings appeared on his back. Dark red tattoos gathered on his bare chest. Soren's divine power and divinity continued to pour into the monkey's body. At the same time, part of the power from his wanderer divinity was also poured into the monkey's body by Soren. He still couldn't directly create a true god. However, Soren left the seed of a true god in Ugly Monkey's body and gave him the divinity of a wanderer, directly transforming him into a otherworld messenger. The power of divinity awakened his memories. At the moment when his body was reconstructed, Ugly Monkey's memories were almost completely restored. However, he still retained the memories of the moment before his death. After regaining his consciousness, he was a little confused and didn't know where he was. However, he soon realized that he had changed. Not only did he have more power, but there were also some changes in his body. He was a little clumsy when he controlled his black wings to fall, but he soon became very familiar with it. Ugly Monkey's figure had turned into a man about 2 meters tall. His face had a hint of viciousness, and his body was shrouded in an evil aura. This was the transformation of his soul. Even his appearance was formed by the characteristics of his soul. Soren's divine power gave Ugly Monkey more power. His body was shrouded in a halo of evil aura. At the same time, his identity as a otherworld messenger gave him the power of shadow, rogue, and slaughter. Greetings, Your Excellency. The leading Saint Cardinal welcomed Ugly Monkey's arrival. Under her lead, tens of thousands of petitioners knelt down on one knee and saluted Ugly Monkey in front of them. Messengers were second only to the vassal gods. Soren's kingdom didn't have a real vassal god, so messengers were the people with the highest status in the kingdom. Messengers had a very special position in the kingdom. Not only did they have great power, but they also represented the will of the gods when they appeared. At the same time, they were also responsible for negotiating with the god of death and receiving the souls of believers from the underworld and other kingdoms. Messengers had very special soul characteristics. There were very few petitioners who could freely leave the kingdom. Messengers from other realms also had the ability of plane teleportation, which could almost reach most of the plane kingdoms. Messengers from other realms had many natural abilities. These abilities included but were not limited to legendary language, legendary writing, spiritual communication, teleportation, precise teleportation, astral travel, shape-shifting, and so on. Ugly Monkey, who had just been revived, was still adapting. However, he didn't forget his responsibility. Ugly Monkey quickly arrived in front of 2 powerful heroic spirits and pressed his hands on their heads. With the light of divine power, Ugly Monkey injected his own divinity into the 2 most powerful heroic spirits. In the name of Ugly Monkey, I bestow upon thee the power of Otherworld God's servant. The light that shrouded the temple turned into 2 rays and entered the bodies of the 2 heroic spirits. Then their forms began to change. This phenomenon was called promotion, which was a direct promotion of the soul in the kingdom. Shadow wings appeared on the backs of the 2 heroic spirits. They didn't turn into the form of demon hunters. Instead, they were directly shrouded in shadow energy. Dark shadows covered them and they looked like vague outlines. The light of divine power turned into sharp blades, and the power of faith shaped into armor. The strength of these 2 heroic spirits directly broke through the legendary realm and reached the power of advanced legendary. They were the Otherworld God's servants. They were subordinates promoted by Ugly Monkey. If they were in the upper realm, they could be understood as shadow angels. In other words, they were created by the gods and Soren's battle servants. Otherworld God servants were similar to Saint Cardinal, but they couldn't be transformed through conventional means. They had to be personally created by Soren or the Otherworld God servants. War is coming. My lord ordered me to lead the heroic spirit army to attack the kingdom of fear. Ugly Monkey's figure flew up. Soren's promotion directly turned him into a creature above the demigod level. He looked down at the army of petitioners in front of him and said in a deep voice, 3 days later, I will open the door to the kingdom of fear and attack the kingdom of fear. It was the time of the Avatar crisis. Soren didn't have the ability to revive a legendary believer, and he had to bring back Ugly Monkey's body. What he could do was to send Ugly Monkey into the kingdom of fear and turn him into a god servant. For Soren, Ugly Monkey, who had sneaked into the kingdom of fear, was undoubtedly the best candidate for commander. The heroic spirits in the kingdom of fear would be led by him and become the main force to attack the kingdom of fear. Ugly Monkey's death was a pity. However, Ugly Monkey's death was also a success. There was finally a petitioner who could command in Soren's kingdom of fear. A Saint Cardinal wasn't enough to lead everything in the kingdom of fear, but a god servant from another world could be trained. Ugly Monkey was dead. But he also came back to life. He was transformed into a god servant and replaced Soren to carry out the task of guiding the souls of believers. He would also be the main force in this kingdom of fear's war. The bottomless abyss. Near the hot lava, Soren panted slightly and withdrew his power. Promoting Ugly Monkey cost him a lot. It cost him 12 divinity points and hundreds of divine power points. Ugly Monkey was a very good believer. He was worthy of Soren's training. Therefore, Soren gave Ugly Monkey a little power of the rogue clergy. This way he could consider training him to be a rogue god in the future. The Golumba Arena was another key to attacking the Kingdom of Fear. First of all, this was the bottomless abyss. They could directly reach the desolate land of despair through the portal. There were often a large number of petitioners in a Kingdom of Fear, and these were all consumed by the demon army. During this time, the demon incarnation Sauron stopped using battles to level up demons. Instead, he kept accumulating the number of dretches. At present, there were nearly 100,000 dretches in the Golumba Arena. There were also a large number of abyss worms bought from demons, night witches and hags. These abyss worms were hatching in the blood pool. When their corruption was complete, the number of dretches would increase again. Motor City. The golem factory that had been operating continuously for a long time stopped today. A large number of witches were busy assembling the golem puppets that had been manufactured. Motor City had experienced several attacks from the lower planes. These attacks brought a lot of losses to Motor City, but they also obtained a lot of soul crystals after defeating the demons. The soul crystals were consumed on these golem puppets, and some of the mid-grade and high-grade soul crystals came from the depths of the Bator Inferno. For this reason, Soren even sold a divine artifact as a commodity. In the basement of the golem factory, dense clay golems were lined up at the front. These were all combat golems that had not been activated after they were manufactured. They were different from the golems sent to the construction site. These clay golems were all injected with the combat ability, focus on defense. Behind thousands of clay golems were rows of stone golems. Although the number had decreased a lot, it had reached the scale of 2,000 or 3,000. Then there were the more powerful and rarer steel golems. Most of the steel from the bottomless abyss was consumed here. There were more than 600 steel golems. They were not made by the apprentices but by a group of witches. Almost all the soul crystals from the Bator Inferno were consumed here. Finally, there were the 24 diamond golems. They consumed almost all the rare minerals from the Bator Inferno. These diamond golems were made by Gloria, Fallen Witch and Alice. Boom! The entire Motor City suddenly shook, and then a huge amount of energy came from the deepest part of the laboratory. The golems kept in the basement of the golem factory suddenly shook, and then they were activated one by one. Chapter 973. Is it going to start? Gloria stood at the top of the arcane tower, looking down at the entire city of Mordor and murmured, "I don't know if Vivian is ready." Although her relationship with Soren could not be more intimate, Gloria was also very clear that her position in Soren's heart could not be compared to Vivian. However, she had nothing to be jealous of. Gloria was already very satisfied with the current situation, even if she vaguely felt something. The divination clergy gave her some special powers, which allowed her to vaguely feel and discover some things that might happen in the future, as well as what had happened in the past. She was learning how to become a god, and as a god she obviously had to adapt to a new perspective. This time, the main force of the attack on the Kingdom of Fear was not the troops of Mordor City. For such a war there were very few mortals that could be of use. Prepare to open the portal. Target locked on the wilderness of despair and destruction. Charging the portal. Start the portal. The cold mechanical voice sounded. Under the command of Thaling, a portal was opened, and then the mighty golem army walked into the portal from the underground factory. The Thaling in charge of the command was not the Thaling experimental body created by Gloria, but Thaling number 1 who had entered the mechanical realm of clockwork nirvana. For these Thaling who had already established a foothold in the mechanical realm, it was undoubtedly valuable to make friends with a powerful god. They knew very well that the investment now could bring greater benefits to themselves in the future. So this battle was not only joined by the golem army of Mordor City, but also by the golem puppets from the mechanical realm. Moreover, part of the golem factory in Mordor City was completed by these Thaling puppets, and there were many resources in the mechanical realm that could be used. Only Soren and Vivian would participate in this battle. The other core members all stayed in Mordor City, at least to give others the feeling that Mordor City was not doing anything, just concentrating on preparing for the harvest celebration. At the same time, in the depths of Golumba Arena, a huge and magnificent portal had been completed. The portal had been completed a week ago, but it was only opened today. Along with the emergence of a blood-red radiance, the portal locked onto the wilderness of destruction and despair. The massive demonic army that had gathered near the military camp also began to move. In this battle, Sauron did not mobilize the demon army because the demons were not that trustworthy. They only cared about their own interests and the benefits they could get in front of them. In contrast, although the demon army was more prone to mental spasms, they were very loyal to Sauron in the beginning, at least when he was still so powerful. For this battle, Sauron had mobilized most of the troops in the Gulumba arena. Hundreds of thousands of demons had been mobilized. Sauron was staking everything on this battle. If they failed, not only would Mordor city be severely damaged, but the other forces would also be destroyed. This battle could only succeed, and failure was not an option. In the northwest of the Guruba arena, a dark teleportation portal had been opened. Soon after, a large army of demon hunters and petitioners that numbered in the tens of thousands appeared. Sauron could not enter the kingdom of God yet, so he could not directly link the kingdom of God to the wilderness of despair and destruction. The angel incarnation of the ugly monkey took over his task and opened a temporary portal in the kingdom of God so that the petitioners could temporarily leave the kingdom of God and go to other planes. The petitioners could not leave the kingdom of God for too long, otherwise they would become very weak. This battle was destined to be a quick one because the strength of these petitioners would gradually decline if they left the kingdom of God for too long. Without the power of the kingdom of God, it would be difficult for them to support a long battle. A group of hellhounds wandered in the empty desert. As the most common creature in the wilderness of destruction and despair, hellhounds were in a state of hunger most of the time. They thirsted for food and flesh and were not friendly to any creature that entered this country. At this moment, a portal opened. The nearby hellhounds obviously noticed the presence of the portal, and then they approached with a grin. Almost 30 hellhounds gathered together, waiting for the target to appear. With so many hellhounds, it was enough to kill a high-grade demon. These hellhounds almost foresaw that they could have a full meal, so they were more excited. A dretch appeared. It was obviously shocked when it saw so many hellhounds, but it was very surprising that it did not run away. Dretches were very timid. The hellhounds were obviously not very satisfied with the prey that appeared in front of them, because the dretch was too small and its meat was too small. Even with the bones, it was not enough for them to eat. However, the portal did not close, and the hellhounds knew that there should be more demons coming. Boom. As if the portal was officially activated, the light on it gradually turned blood red, and then hundreds of dretches appeared. They gathered together in a mess and also found the hellhounds outside. However, what was surprising was that although these dretches were afraid, they did not run away. On the contrary, some dretches even seemed eager to rush up. The hellhounds felt that something was wrong. Although there was a lot of flesh in front of them, so many dretches did not run away. The hellhounds felt that more enemies would appear. Whoa! The hellhounds howled to summon their companions. It was rare to see so much flesh in the wilderness of despair and destruction. The leader of the hellhounds was looking for his companions within a radius of tens of kilometers, telling them that there was a large number of prey here. A whoa! A whoa! A wolf howl came in response, and soon other hellhounds appeared nearby. At this time, the third wave of teleportation was completed. The number of dretches expanded to 2,000 or 3,000, and some berserk demons also appeared. This made the hellhounds a little uneasy because there were too many demons. Such a large number was not something that ordinary people could teleport. But at this time, hundreds of hellhounds had gathered. They were very powerful and ferocious creatures. Even in the Bator Inferno, they dared to attack high-grade demons, so they still tried to attack. The demons howled excitedly. Facing the attack of the hellhounds, they were very excited and rushed up directly. A large space near the teleportation circle was emptied. Then the next batch of demons arrived. This time there were more people teleported. Not only were there a large number of dretches, but there were also many middle-grade demons, including a small team of succubus that could fly. The succubus quickly attacked. After they found the hellhounds, they immediately led the team to surround them. Some Voros went around from the side and seemed to intend to kill all the hellhounds in front of them. The situation quickly reversed. The hellhounds became panicked. At this time, the teleportation circle flashed again, and with a scorching breath, more than 10 flaming demons appeared behind the teleportation circle. Then more and more demons poured out. Assassins, soul judges, Glabrizu, six-armed snake demons, and a large group of high-grade demons appeared and announced the death penalty for these hellhounds. And these high-grade demons did not care. Before the battle, they would eat some hellhounds as an appetizer. The domain of flames expanded. With the rapidly increasing temperature, a terrible demon finally walked out of the teleportation circle. Bela Lord, Sauron. As a true god, Sauron's original body could not participate in this battle. His role was to break the throne of fear at the end. In the previous battle, he could only rely on his demon incarnation and the oracles from another world. Because of the Avatar crisis, the kingdom of God still rejected him. Sauron tried to restrain these demons as much as possible. As chaotic and evil existences, demons were very good cannon fodder because many of them were simple-minded and bloodthirsty. However, it was very troublesome to command them. Even Sauron could only give simple orders. The mighty army of hundreds of thousands of demons began to move forward. They were the vanguard of the attack. The ugly monkey had locked the entrance of the kingdom of fear. These demons' cannon fodder would be the first to enter the battle and consume the enemy's strength. Sauron did not say too much about the goal this time. He just told the demons that he wanted to occupy a new plane of land, and all the souls killed would be their spoils of war. Of course, as the main force, the greater demons naturally knew that the real goal was the kingdom of fear. However, they also knew that the battle this time was led by a terrifying evil god, and at the same time, there were other troops joining in as well. A living evil god and a dead evil god. The demons were not idiots. They obviously knew which side had a higher chance of winning. Therefore, these demons did not hesitate to choose Soren. They were ready to divide the treasures of the Dread Lord after winning the battle. Soren only cared about the power of the Dread Lord. As for the other treasures, he did not mind sharing them with others. The Dread Lord was really dead, but he was not completely dead. Like Soren, he could not enter the battle. Therefore, the key to victory was their respective armies. The army of the Kingdom of Fear and the huge army gathered by Soren. If the Dread Lord won, then Soren would not be able to launch a second attack in a short time. And if Soren succeeded, the throne that held the soul of the Dread Lord would be shattered. Dozens of miles away. Different from the noise of the demons, this place was filled with cold mechanical sounds. Tens of thousands of golem puppets had finished gathering. At this moment they were quietly waiting in place, ready to speed up and enter the battle at any time. Chapter 974. Hundreds of thousands of demons were advancing in the desolation of despair. Such a large scale caused great panic among the natives of the desolation of despair. They thought that the demons were not going to fight anymore and were now planning to occupy this plain. Fortunately, these demons did not attack the natives. They just kept moving forward and gradually approached the location of the Blood River. Because the number of the demon army was too large, it was almost impossible to hide from others after the official action. The first to notice the abnormality was the goddess of misfortune, Ben-Saba. Her kingdom was in the blood sea of the bottomless abyss, and the blood river in the desolation of despair and destruction was one of the entrances. When the mighty army of demons gathered, a trace of divine radiance appeared above the blood river. Then, a beautiful woman in a dark red robe with a veil over her face appeared on the blood river. She stood on her snow-white toes and looked at the army of demons in front of her. As if she thought of something, she couldn't help but frown. This was the oracle of the goddess of misfortune. She was also the incarnation of the goddess of misfortune. Now, everything that she could see, the goddess of misfortune could also see clearly. The demon army passed through the blood river and soon reached a special entrance. Change space, power of divinity. Soren's divine power spread out. With the spread of the power of slaughter, a space crack appeared in front of them. A terrifying aura overflowed from the space crack, and many demons couldn't help but tremble. But then the aura of the Baelor Lord Sauron spread. With the spread of the evil aura, he took the lead in leading the army into the kingdom of fear. This was a kingdom full of despair and fear. The land in the distance was black. Blood seemed to have permeated the world. Even the river had a trace of blood. The power of the Dread Lord was inherited from the god of tyranny, Ban. So this kingdom was changed from the original kingdom of the god of tyranny. A tyrannical system ruled by fear was implemented here. The powerful petitioners were like feudal lords, controlling many souls with cruel means. Demons were also one of the residents here. The Dread Lord had a large number of high-grade demons loyal to him. They stole souls from other kingdoms. In addition to the petitioners, there were also a large number of souls who were forced to reincarnate. In front of the entrance was a huge fortress. The divine kingdom of fear was divided into 8 lands, and the rulers of these lands were the right-hand men of the Dread Lord. 5 of the rulers were petitioners of the Dread Lord, while the other 3 were high-level demons under his control. The fortress in front of them was one of them. It was called Blacktooth Fortress, and it was the first line of defense of the Kingdom of Fear. Groups of petitioners appeared on the walls of the fortress. The petitioners of the Dread Lord were transformed into dark guards and dread dominators. Ordinary petitioners were similar to humans, and some of them were transformed into demons. Among all the petitioners, the Lord of Fear was the most difficult to deal with because as early as the reign of the god of tyranny, Ban, the Lord of Fear was in the form of a petitioner. The Dread Lord inherited this. The highest level in the divine kingdom was the form of the Dread Lord, a terrifying creature covered in black armor and holding a giant sword. They had amazing combat power, and their bodies were surrounded by a spirit of fear. The core of the entire kingdom was fear. The demon god relied on fear to rule the world, and the powerful petitioners automatically emitted the power of fear to intimidate and enslave other souls. Prepare to attack. Sauron, the Baelor Lord, gave the order to attack. Then under the command of the demon warlord, hundreds of thousands of dretches were caught up to the battlefield. Sauron tried to expand the scope of the evil aura as much as possible to strengthen the combat power and willpower of the dretches so that they would not collapse under the influence of the spirit of fear. Thousands of petitioners appeared in the fortress. After all, the Dread Lord was one of the oldest gods. Although his enemies had consumed a lot of believers, the number of petitioners accumulated over thousands of years was still huge. When the Dread Lord died, a portion of the petitioners died as well. However, there were still many who survived. At this moment, the army of petitioners in front of them numbered more than 10,000, and their leader was a demigod-level god's messenger from another world. He ruled hundreds of kilometers of land in this kingdom and enslaved thousands of souls to work. Boom! There was a dull explosion. The first batch of dretches was as many as tens of thousands, but they only lasted for less than 10 minutes before collapsing. As cannon fodder, they consumed the first batch of the enemy's firepower, and many arrows and spells did not even let them climb the walls. But soon the second batch of dretches appeared. This batch of dretches expanded to more than 30,000 people, and the pressure on the believers of the Dread Lord suddenly increased greatly. However, they did not dare to let the dretches come up because there were more demons behind them. If they did not repel these dretches, the other demons would quickly take advantage of the chaos to attack the walls. The second batch, the third batch, the fourth batch, and the fifth batch. 5 consecutive waves of attacks of tens of thousands of people quickly tired the enemies in the fortress. The demons' human wave tactic had always been successful. As long as the number was large enough, they could often destroy the enemy's defense. It's almost time. Sauron looked up at the sky, then his figure rose into the air. Summon demon army. Demon covenant. Summon Baelor. The raging flames spread and Sauron's figure rose into the air. With the opening of a portal, a group of high-grade demons composed of Glabrizu and assassins were summoned. At the same time, 2 Baelors also appeared in the air. As a Baelor Lord, Sauron's new ability was Summon Baelor. The appearance of 3 Baelors meant the beginning of the general attack. The pressure on the fortress suddenly soared several times. Under the crazy attack of the demon army, part of the wall quickly fell. At the same time, the oracles who controlled this land also began to ask for help from other places. The divine kingdom was a whole. When the attack began, it meant the outbreak of the divine war. Half of the fortress quickly fell, but hundreds of kilometers away, tens of thousands of demons and petitioners had gathered. They moved quickly in the direction of the demon army, and some powerful demons and petitioners had opened the greater portal. With the light of teleportation, at least a dozen high-grade petitioners and demons arrived on the battlefield. The enemy's support had arrived. The attack of the demon army was instantly contained, and the number of low-grade demons decreased at an alarming rate. The whole wall was like a bloody meat grinder. In a short time, tens of thousands of corpses had been piled up. The enemy's reinforcements were constantly arriving on the battlefield. With a Saint Necromancer opening the portal, in the castle thousands of kilometers away in the northwest of the Divine Kingdom, a group of fully armed Dark Guards in black armor teleported. Dark Guards. The main force of the Divine Kingdom of Fear. They were the core members of the Divine War, and they were all powerful professionals when they were alive. The advantage of the demon army began to reverse. Many high-grade demons were worried, and some even had the idea of retreating. However, there was a smile on the face of the demon Sauron. The despairing wilderness. About 50 kilometers away from the coordinates where the demon army entered, a heavy golem puppet was advancing. With a powerful divine power breaking through the space inlaid with the divine kingdom of fear was directly torn apart, and then a crack appeared on the edge of the divine kingdom. The divine kingdom was attached to the plane. This characteristic meant that there was more than one entrance to the divine kingdom. Activate battle command. Golem army activated. Activate battle mode. Defense command activated. Cooperative Battle Command activated. Golem Army Advance. The moment the space crack opened, hundreds of clay golems stepped into the kingdom with black soil, and then they quickly killed all the petitioners in front of them. This was a small gathering place. It looked like the scale of a village. The petitioners needed to explore the resources of the divine kingdom, so outside the core temple area, there were many villages, towns, and mines that needed to be arranged for the petitioners. The Fear Lord relied on enslavement to control the divine kingdom, and the ruler of this land was a high-grade dark guard. At this moment he was surrounded by dozens of golem puppets. Eliminate all enemies. Lock onto the coordinates of the Throne of Fear. The golem army began to advance. Under the cold command, the golem army's eyes shone with blood-red light. This mighty golem army did not go to support the demon army. Instead, they directly wiped out all the enemies on the road, and then began to advance in a straight line, quickly rushing to the position of the Throne of Fear. The clay golems opened the way, followed by the stone golems, and the steel golems were the main force to support at any time. The golem army was like a sharp knife, advancing hundreds of kilometers in just a few hours, and flattening 3 defensive fortresses. At this time, the enemies that went to the front line to support the demon army realized that there was more than one enemy attacking the divine kingdom. There was another golem army that was rapidly entering the divine kingdom, and their target was the Throne of Fear. But at this time it was very difficult for them to come back and support. The demon army successfully held them back, and at least tens of thousands of petitioners were held back near the Blacktooth Fortress. Only a few legendary petitioners successfully left the battlefield. However, all of this was just the beginning. When the golem army successfully broke through and attracted the enemy's firepower, an army of tens of thousands of petitioners also invaded this divine kingdom. Unlike the other armies, they sneaked into the dark forest, then quickly went around the fortress in front, and approached the peak of the Throne of Fear from the side. It was a mountain peak that towered into the clouds. And the throne that sealed the soul of the Fear Lord was built on top of the clouds. Soren's target was the Throne of Fear. As long as the Throne of Fear was destroyed, victory would be decided. There was no point in fighting with these petitioners. After Vivian took over the Fear priesthood, these petitioners could only choose between swearing allegiance to her or dying. His goal was to destroy the Throne of Fear, not to occupy the entire divine kingdom. As long as the Throne of Fear was destroyed, everything would be over. Chapter 975. There was a saying in the art of war, what's false is true and what's true is false. The demon legion that attacked first was not completely a distraction, especially after the Golem Legion's large-scale advance led away most of the reinforcements. Succubus Legion Advance. Operation Assassin Demon. 6-armed Snake Demon attack the gate. Baylor Demon, teleport to the interior of the fortress with me. As the orders were issued, Sauron's figure suddenly accelerated and directly teleported to the interior of the Blacktooth Fortress. Then with him as the center, some strange demons appeared. These demons also had a pair of demon wings, but it was not enough to support long-distance flight. They had obvious horns and there were dark green runes on their naked chests. The speed of these demons was quite amazing, and almost every one of them had amazing agility. After entering the battle state, these strange demons were covered in flames, and they looked like half of a small Baylor demon. The demon hunters had joined the battle. The demon hunters created by Soren were not only the ones in the kingdom of God. Near the blood pool in the Golumba arena, there was another group of demon hunters with purer blood and more demonized bloodlines. Not all of them were transformed from the souls of Soren's believers. Many of them were high-quality souls that Sauron the Baylor demon found in the abyss. These demon hunters were created by Sauron, and they only obeyed his orders. They belonged to the fighting force outside the Demon Legion. The number of these demon hunters was not large, about 200 or 300 people, far less than the number of transformed demons in the kingdom of God. However, when they entered the battle, their suppression was very obvious, especially with the cooperation of the Succubus Legion to dominate the air. The demon hunters' sudden advance instantly brought great pressure to the Dark Guards. The change between the true and the false happened in an instant. The reinforcements of the Blacktooth Fortress turned to intercept the Golem Legion, and Sauron decisively pressed the most elite troops at this moment. The battle was completely reversed in an instant. The addition of the demon hunters tore apart the enemy's defensive line, and the result of that was that the enemy fell into the sea of demons. Almost all the demons who wanted to retreat at first roared and pounced again. Now was the best time to snatch the spoils of war and snatch the souls. Even the other high-ranking demons who had been slacking began to work hard. They were ready to take down the fortress and ask for rewards from His Excellency Sauron. In just a short while, when more than 10,000 demons broke through the defense line, the defense system of the Blacktooth Fortress completely collapsed. As long as the enemy couldn't gather together to form an effective defensive line, it would be a tragedy. The demons pounced forward, biting and slaughtering. Soon, a large number of the defenders in the Blacktooth Fortress died. Even the Dark Guards died under the siege of the High Demons. At this moment, the demonic army, which was used as a distraction, instantly became the main force of the attack. After harvesting the souls in the Blacktooth Fortress, Sauron immediately ordered the army to advance. Over 100,000 demonic army swiftly advanced toward the Throne of Fear. The change in reality happened in the blink of an eye. When the petitioners who went to support the Golem army had just gained a foothold, the demonic army had already advanced more than 100 kilometers. After conquering several places in a row, the demons' morale was higher and higher. Basically, without Sauron's urging, the demons pounced forward, eager to snatch more souls in this battle. At the same time, some powerful Dark Guards were hunted down, and their divinity was scattered to some of the high-ranking demons. Even Rachel, who followed Soren, gained some divinity. The other assassin demons and 8-armed snake demons gained more divinity. What they wanted to do the most at this moment was to kill more enemies with divinity. The situation was suddenly reversed. The demonic army advanced faster than the Golem army. The demon hunters were like a sharp knife that led the demonic army to advance quickly. With the support of a huge number of demons, the petitioners who were less than 10,000 were almost instantly devoured. At the same time, in the vicinity of the Dark Forest, a group of up to 1,000 demon hunters and heroic spirits were advancing. They all had a trace of the power of shadow. These troops quickly approached the Throne of Fear in a semi-stealth state. While the demonic army and the Golem army attracted the attention of the demonic army, they quickly went hundreds of kilometers deep into the Kingdom of Fear. Then, when the Dark Guards were busy intercepting the demonic army again, the vanguard led by Ugly Monkey had arrived near the mountains. "We can begin." Ugly Monkey glanced at the Saint Cardinal beside him and nodded. "Prepare the teleportation portal." More than 10 high-ranking priests who accompanied them stood up. Under the leadership of the Saint Cardinal, they set up a teleportation portal at an astonishing speed. Then they locked the coordinates to the Dark Forest. Along with the radiance of the teleportation portal, groups of heroic spirits in armor walked out from it, followed by an even larger number of petitioners. Among Soren's believers, there were a large number of combat-type professions. Many pirates would also enter his Kingdom of Fear after they died. Therefore, Soren, as a combat-type deity, had a high quality of petitioners. Through the teleportation portal, he quickly transferred more than 30,000 soldiers to the Kingdom of Fear. These troops had already approached the Throne of Fear. At the same time, the slaughterers who had been guarding the Throne of Fear had also discovered them. There were tens of thousands of powerful demons and petitioners guarding the Throne of Fear. At the same time, there were also terrifying slaughterers wandering around. This was the last line of defense of the Dread Lord. No matter what happened outside, these troops responsible for guarding the Throne of Fear would not leave. Only by defeating them could Soren's petitioner army get close to the Throne of Fear. The first wave of confrontation quickly broke out. Ugly Monkey had fallen while exploring this place. Therefore, he knew the terrain and the number of enemies around the Throne of Fear very well. As a god's messenger from another world, he led the demonic hunter army to attack first and quickly attacked the Dark Guard's line of defense. The priests at the back were casting divine spells. After the petitioner army gathered, they began to press forward. There were only about 10,000 demons here, but most of them were very powerful. They were the last resistance to approaching the Throne of Fear. The news of another army approaching the Throne of Fear was quickly spread to the other Dark Guards. On the path of the Golem army, a large number of enemies who had the ability to teleport gave up on fighting. They directly teleported to the Throne of Fear. Then they saw more and more enemies below the mountains. Under the light of the teleportation spell, the number of demons and petitioners quickly increased to more than 20,000. This was the will of the Dreadlord commanding them. After realizing that Soren's army was approaching the Throne of Fear, he decisively gave up on stopping the demons and Golem army. Instead, he gathered most of the elites under the Throne of Fear to stop the strongest petitioner army. P.S. First update. Chapter 976. On a mountain peak that pierced through the clouds, a throne made of white bones and dark green rocks appeared. It was suspended in the air, and in the center was a huge black stone pillar. The height of the mountain peak was close to 3,000 meters, and the height of the throne of fear was more than a few hundred meters. The whole throne was almost close to the clouds, and one could overlook the whole kingdom of fear from it. There was no path to the throne of fear. Unless one had the ability to fly, one would never be able to enter the throne of fear. The Dread Lord had already expected this. His remaining divine power turned into barriers and sealed off the sky around the throne of fear, not allowing anyone to come close. There were 3 lines of defense under the throne of fear. The first line was the advanced devils on the periphery. These devils were all enslaved by the Dread Lord and did not have the freedom of their own souls. They would protect the throne of fear with their lives, because if the throne of fear was breached, these devils would all die. The second line of defense was formed by the most devout petitioners. Most of them were top-level dark guards and Dread Lords. They were fanatics when they were alive, and would not take a step back in the face of any enemy. The last line of defense was the slaughterers created by the Dread Lord's divine power. They were very terrifying creatures, and any one of them could challenge an army. There were more than 10 of them under the throne of fear. They prevented anyone from getting close to the throne, including the other petitioners in the kingdom of fear. The sudden increase in the number of enemies brought great pressure to Soren's heroic spirit army. The ugly monkey's attack was stopped, and under the enemy's desperate resistance, he slowly retreated to his original position. At this moment, there were already 50 to 60,000 dark army gathered under the throne of fear. Almost all the enemies in the kingdom of fear who had the ability to teleport had arrived. There were still hundreds of thousands of petitioners enslaved by the Dread Lord's will in the kingdom of fear. They were getting ready to surround and destroy Soren's heroic spirit army. If they could not destroy the throne of fear before the petitioners gathered, all the heroic spirits under Soren's command would die here. Fortunately, the Dread Lord had gathered most of his forces under the throne of fear. The Devil Army and the Golem Army were able to advance quickly. They were only 50 to 60 kilometers away from Soren's heroic spirit army. If all the troops were gathered together, the combat power of both sides would be evenly matched, and it would be difficult to determine the victor. However, why would Soren do something that he was only half confident in? As a god that had risen from the ranks of mortals, Soren had always planned his every move. How could he not prepare some final moves at this crucial moment when he was attacking the throne of terror? Get into formation. Following the roars of the heroic spirits, thousands of petitioners lined up into 3 military formations. The demon hunters also flew into the air, while the saint priests began to prepare a large-scale buff spell. Divine spells of this level could not be completed by her alone. The person behind all of this was Soren himself. His divine power was continuously channeling into the bodies of the saint priests. Teams of black-armored dark guards appeared. The Dread Lord had enslaved a large number of demons. Most of them were middle-grade and high-grade demons. As it was close to the border between the Bator Inferno and the Bottomless Abyss, he had also enslaved many demons from the crack. The Dark Guards were still the main force of the Divine Kingdom. These terrifying creatures were similar to demons, but they maintained a human form and looked similar to the demon hunters. The Dark Guards were a very difficult creature to deal with, especially the Dark Guards created by the Dread Lord. They could also evolve into the more powerful Dread Lord. Dread Lord. Challenge rating, 21. This was a kind of semi-holy creature. In the Divine Kingdom, their level of existence was the same as that of a Saint Cardinal. Not only did they have amazing melee ability, but they could also use divine spells below the 7th grade. The most frightening thing about them was that they had an area of effect aura of fear. Since the fall of the god of tyranny, fear, replaced strife as the core of the Dread Lord. At that time, the power of the aura of fear was given to the powerful petitioners. The aura of the Dread Lord was up to an astonishing diameter of 100 meters. In other words, the biggest difficulty of the current battle was that more than 10 Dread Lords would spread out and cover an area of 1,500 meters with the power of the aura of fear. This kind of spiritual energy would intimidate enemies with weak willpower. Even heroic spirits might be greatly affected. Glory of courage. The saint priests cast a divine spell that made them immune to fear, but the aura was far more powerful than the effect of the spell. The divine spell could only temporarily improve the will of the Dread Lord, not to mention that there was still the residual power of the Dread Lord here. So when the Dread Lords gathered, the combat power of the heroic spirit army was seriously weakened. The ugly monkey was not in a hurry to attack. He was waiting for the arrival of the golem army. The golem puppets were constructs and were basically immune to the effect of the aura of fear. They were mechanical creatures that could only carry out orders, so in the next battle, the golem army must be the ones to fight. Moreover, Soren's big move also needed a little time to prepare. At the same time, far away in the material plane, Gloria's figure appeared at the top of the arcane tower. At this moment, the arcane tower had floated under the control of the fallen witch, but because of the cover of magic, ordinary people could not see the existence of the arcane tower. Gloria stood in the center of the astrology platform. Under her feet was a huge astrology array. With the wind blowing her beautiful long hair, an invisible barrier wrapped the entire arcane tower. A white light appeared under Gloria's feet, which was the characteristic of the top divination spells. At this moment she was holding a staff in one hand and a crystal ball in the other. She looked like a witch who was divining fate. However, at this moment, Gloria was not divining fate. She was calculating the trajectory of the astral plane, and at the same time, transmitting her magic power and will to the astral plane through the array. A low incantation could be heard. This spell was so long that it was impossible to have time to cast it in most battles because the enemy would not give you such a long time to cast it. However, this was the safe city of Mordor. With the help of the fallen witch who was guarding by the side, Gloria kept chanting the ancient spell. A total of more than 30 spells took her nearly half an hour. Prophecy, domain. When the last part of the spell was completed, Gloria raised the staff in her hand and pointed to the void. Then a huge amount of magic power surged out. In the blink of an eye, her face became pale, and her whole body seemed to be on the verge of collapse. At this moment, in the distant astral plane, a meteorite that was moving according to its original trajectory suddenly changed direction. It flew directly through the void and flew to the lower plane. Chapter 977. There was still a stalemate on the battlefield. However, with the arrival of the golem army, the pressure on the Dark Guardians increased significantly. They gave up the initiative to attack and turned to defend the throne of fear. Ugly Monkey had not given the order to attack. The golem puppets formed a line of defense in front of the Einherjar army. They seemed to be waiting for the arrival of the demon army or something else. From time to time, Ugly Monkey would look up at the sky and then silently calculate the time, as if he was thinking about the opportunity to attack. Time ticked by. The figure of the Baylor appeared in the distance, but it was not on the route of the Einherjar army, but on the other side of the throne of fear. Demons were not easy to control, and it was almost impossible for them to fight together. If they attacked in the same direction, it might lead to internal strife. Sauron, the Baylor Lord, attacked the flank. At this time, most of the low-grade demons had died. Almost all the surviving demons were promoted to middle-grade demons. Some of the high-grade demons also plundered the power of divinity from the Lord of Fear. It's almost time. Ugly Monkey seemed to sense something and looked up at the sky. All of a sudden, the weather on the whole battlefield changed drastically, and then a powerful wave of divine power appeared. A crack suddenly appeared in the sky above the kingdom of fear. Soren's divine power covered the whole battlefield. He broke the space of the kingdom of fear and then guided a terrible spell into this world. It was a huge meteorite about 1 kilometer in diameter. After entering the kingdom of fear, it immediately turned into a huge fireball. This terrible meteorite immediately fell at high speed after entering the kingdom of fear. Its target was the enemy under the throne of fear. Meteorite. It was the most effective spell to destroy a city among the legendary spells. It was also the signature spell of the Northern Witch Council. It was a legendary spell involving prophecy, astrology, spells, and so on. Under normal circumstances, only the leader of the Northern Witch Council could master it. The power of this spell was far beyond that of Meteor Burst. The two were not even on the same level. Soren had seen the power of Meteor with his own eyes. The Eye of the North had destroyed the steel fortress of the Githyanki with a single meteor. Currently, there were only 2 people in the north who could master this spell. One was the Eye of the North, and the other was Gloria, who had been trained as the successor of the Northern Witches. It was just that Gloria came to Motor City because of Soren, and more importantly, Soren gave her the Scepter of Savras. With the power of prophecy, Gloria could lock onto meteorites in the astral plane and use spells to control them. Rumble. A terrifying impact erupted in an instant. When the meteor crashed, the ground shook and the nearby mountains crumbled. The only thing that remained unchanged was the main peak that supported the terror throne. Huge waves of air mixed with dust flew up to a height of hundreds of meters, expanding like a mushroom cloud. By the time the priests cast their spells to dispel the side effects of the meteor spell, a huge crater with a diameter of about 1,500 meters had appeared in front of them. Cracks had appeared on the ground around it. Thousands of demons and petitioners had died under the meteor spell. If this terrifying spell was used on Mordor City, it would be enough to completely turn Mordor City into ruins. On the other side, all the demons under Sauron's command opened their mouths in surprise. There was a sense of relief on their faces. Although Meteor Burst took a long time to prepare, it was very fast. The meteor fell in an instant, and the next moment, more than half of the enemies in front of them were cleared. Attack. The high-grade demons who had just plundered a lot of souls were excited. As the crack in the sky gradually disappeared, they obviously realized that the evil gods had joined the battle. This meteor burst greatly weakened the enemy's power. The high-grade demons who had just plundered divinity from the Lord of Fear were eager to move. They seemed to want to get more souls and more power. The Einherjar under the command of the ugly monkey also began to launch a surprise attack. Meteor Burst did not cause any casualties to them. Only a small number of golems had a little malfunction because of the terrible impact of the meteor. Now they were paralyzed in place and could not move. The ones with the most casualties were the Dark Army guarding the Throne of Fear. At this moment their front line had completely collapsed. All the defensive lines became a joke under the meteor spell. Apart from the enemies who could escape by using teleportation spells, almost all the enemies within the range of the meteor spell were killed. The path leading to the Throne of Terror was immediately cleared out, creating a vacuum. Sword of Destruction. Wail of the Banshee. The first to attack was not the ugly monkey but the little figure who had been hiding in the team. Two figures like little angels were the first to break through the line of defense of the Dark Army and reach the bottom of the Throne of Fear. With the fragments of space torn, a dark magic sword appeared in her hand. Then there was a large-scale wail of the Banshee. The legendary deadly spell that ignored levels suddenly shrouded many dark guards. The terrible infrasound invaded their brains, and then the enemies fell one after another. Vivian and Lillian. As a true god, Soren could not enter the kingdom of God, but Vivian and Lillian who had not been officially apotheosized could. This was their fated battle. Even Soren could not stop the little girl's will. They joined the battle with the Einherjar and were ready to face their own destiny. They were also their most terrible enemies, the Lord of Fear. There were only a few surviving sons of fear in the material plane. Vivian had almost gathered more than 90% of the divine power of fear. Two independent consciousnesses each controlled a body. The main body and the simulacrum played an unimaginable cooperation. Under the storm-like spell bombardment, hundreds of demons fell in the blink of an eye. However, just as the two little girls were going on a killing spree, some terrifying figures appeared. They looked like distorted aliens. They locked onto Vivian's position with their scarlet pupils, and then quickly approached them. Slayers found. Activate Diamond Golem Battle Command. Diamond Golems attack. Dull footsteps were heard. At the back of the Golem army, the powerful construct life that had not been used was finally activated. These Diamond Golems with a challenge level above legendary advanced quickly. No demons or petitioners could stop their footsteps. The Diamond Golems that were modified by Alice had a challenge level of up to 22. Even the Balers were not enough to fight against them in a head-on battle. The all-out attack began. Ugly Monkey sent out all the troops, while he led the Demon Hunter army and rushed to Vivian's side, protecting the little princess of Motor City as she gradually approached the Throne of Fear. Soren's power alone was not enough to completely destroy the Throne of Fear. Vivian had to do it together. Chapter 978. A single meteor spell caused a terrifying number of casualties to the Dark Guards. But under the power of the Dread Lord, they still guarded the throne without fear of death. It wasn't that they were not afraid of death, but that the Dread Lord had completely controlled their souls. These Dark Guards still stubbornly guarded the throne even when they knew death was coming, causing heavy casualties to Soren's Einherjar army. The battle was in a stalemate. But the Einherjar army was still pushing forward little by little, and the golems had suffered heavy losses. Soren had invested tens of thousands of golem puppets in one breath, but now nearly 60% of them had been damaged. If converted into wealth, it would be more than 30 million gold dirhams. The most valuable among them was the soul crystal. As long as any soul crystal was placed inside the golem puppet, If the golem puppet was destroyed again, the extremely valuable soul crystal would be completely destroyed. Half of Soren's losses were in the soul crystals, especially after the 3 diamond golems were destroyed by the terrible slaughterer, which caused Soren to lose more than 3 million kindler pieces. The 3 legendary quality soul crystals shattered, and all that was left was the broken shell of the diamond golem. The Einherjar army's casualties were close to 30%. If it was an army from the material plane, it would have collapsed long ago. But these were all Soren's petitioners. Their existence was to deal with the crueler war in the kingdom of God, so even now none of the petitioners took a step back. They kept charging toward the Dread Lord in front of them, ready to break through the enemy's defense line and open a path for Vivian to reach the throne of fear. A stalemate was not what Soren wanted to see. At this time, in the distant city of Moder, the high priest in charge of monitoring the battlefield had a serious expression. He said in a deep voice, "The petitioners of the Dread Lord are coming. They have formed a large encirclement. We don't have much time left." There weren't only so many petitioners in the kingdom of fear. There were about millions of petitioners in the entire kingdom of fear. Although these petitioners weren't as powerful as the Dark Guards and couldn't rush to the battlefield immediately, they were approaching rapidly. If they were surrounded by them, they would eventually fall into a terrifying siege of numbers. Thaling No. 1's cold voice rang out, "I suggest activating the golem's self-destruct mechanism. Blast a way out of the enemy's defensive line." Golem self-destruct device. This was an ability that came from the mechanical nirvana of the clock. When the self-destruct mechanism was activated, the golem would explode, and the power of the explosion was equivalent to the fireball cast by a legendary wizard. The high priest fell silent for a moment. Then she said solemnly, "Activate the golem's self-destruct mechanism. We have to open a passage within 5 minutes." Following her order, a group of special golem puppets on the battlefield began to rapidly approach. Their eyes flashed with red light, and after charging into the midst of the Dark Guards, they quickly exploded. Boom, boom. Over 100 golems exploded one after another, quickly creating a vacuum in the midst of the enemy. Charge. Ugly Monkey seized the opportunity and led the demon hunters to charge forward. At this moment, Vivian and Lillian also caught up. They quickly broke through the defensive line and reached the bottom of the throne of fear. There were a total of 6 slaughterers guarding the bottom. "Your Excellency Vivian, enter the throne of fear directly. Leave this to us." Ugly Monkey led 2 otherworld god servants to block the slaughterers from the left and right. The otherworld god servants were equivalent to angels, and were only slightly weaker than the slaughterers. Since there were many demon hunters nearby, it shouldn't be a problem to hold them off for now. Vivian also knew that the situation was critical. The little girl nodded and rushed toward the throne of fear. As if sensing Vivian's arrival, a powerful consciousness gradually awakened. In an instant the weather changed. Dark clouds covered the sky above the throne of fear. Accompanied by rumbling lightning, a strange green flame ignited along the way. The Dark Guards guarding the throne of fear became even crazier. They blocked the enemy without fear of death. At the same time, a group of slaughterers rushed toward Vivian. "My good daughter. Come to mommy." A strange voice called out to her. It was a gentle female voice with motherly tenderness. It rang in Vivian's ears. She couldn't help but be stunned. However, she was quickly pushed by Lillian, who anxiously said, "Don't be in a daze. This is the Dreadlord's scheme. He's trying to buy time." Outside of the god of fear, Soren, who had been paying close attention to the battlefield, was also stunned. Because he also heard that familiar voice. The voice seemed to have awakened a distant memory, awakening a beautiful yet haggard face in the deepest part of his memory. Their birth mother. Soren's mother, who was also Vivian's mother. In the kingdom of God. Vivian and Lillian approached the throne of fear quickly. When they arrived at the throne of fear, a beautiful figure clad in a long dress appeared. She seemed rather haggard but displayed a motherly smile. She stood in the throne of fear, gazed at Vivian, smiled and spread her arms. "Vivian, my good daughter. You're finally here? Come here. Come to mommy." Vivian froze on the spot. On the other hand, Lillian was astonished. Because everything before them wasn't an illusion. A real soul appeared before them. And that soul was their mother. "Come here. My good daughter." Vivian's mother smiled. Her smile was so gentle as though she recalled something. "Don't you miss Xerxes? Xerxes is here too. Hurry up. Come to me." Another radiance shone. A loyal old dog appeared beneath the woman's feet. It wagged its tail obediently at Vivian as though calling her over. Xerxes. Vivian was more agitated to see the old dog than when she saw her mother. She extended her arm as though wanting to touch it. But eventually she retracted her arm slowly. The young lady glared at the empty throne of fear and yelled, "It's you! You're the one who imprisoned their souls. You damn bastard! Release their souls." A deep, eerie chuckle sounded. A dark shadow shrouded the throne of fear as though countless eyes were watching them. The deep voice said, "Kill me. Your mother will die. Xerxes will die too. Completely die. Their souls have been imprisoned in the throne of fear. Destroying the throne of fear means killing them with your own hands. Do you really want to do that? You want to kill your own mother? And your most loyal Xerxes?" Chapter 979. Thief. Mother. Vivian appeared to be in great pain while Lillian, who stood beside her, looked anxious. Lillian shook her arm and said, "Big sister, we can't delay any longer. Or else all our efforts will go to waste." This was the first time Lillian addressed Vivian as Big Sister, so formally. It was imaginable how anxious she was. But she wasn't the owner of this body after all. What she controlled was an avatar of the simulacrum spell and didn't have the ability to destroy the Terror Throne. In order to destroy the Terror Throne, Vivian had to be the one to lead it. "Big Brother is waiting for us," Lillian said anxiously. At that moment, the Terror Overlord's furious roar sounded. "Shut up, you damn traitor. I created you. I gave you power. But you betrayed me." Lillian curled her lips in disdain. "Betrayed you? You created me just to revive yourself. I'm the Witch of Terror, Lillian. Not a puppet to be manipulated by anyone." The situation changed. The situation on the battlefield was getting more and more severe. Vivian was only a little girl in her teens after all. Although she was naturally mature and intelligent, it was undoubtedly a very painful and difficult decision for her to make to destroy the throne of terror, kill her mother, and kill her loyal dog Heath with her own hands. Even though Lillian urged anxiously, she still couldn't do it because those two were the most important people in her heart apart from her big brother. Besides, her mother was still calling her name. Damn it. Lillian was like an angry kitten. She growled at Vivian, "How long are you going to hesitate? If this operation fails, Big Brother will be in great danger. Since you can't do it, give me control of this body. Let me do it." Lillian vanished as soon as she finished speaking. She returned to Vivian's body and was about to seize control of the body. However, at this moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the sky, followed by a golden ray of light that fell from the sky. "Big Brother." Vivian raised her head. Her beautiful eyes were filled with tears. For such a kind-hearted little girl, it was too cruel for her to personally end her mother and the old dog that had grown up with her. This would make her feel guilty for the rest of her life. Soren didn't enter the divine kingdom of fear, but his voice reached the little girl's ears. "Let me do it." His voice was low. As the voice fell, the golden light turned into a sharp sword and fell directly toward the souls of his mother and Heath. No. Vivian's eyes widened in shock, but she remained where she was. Outside the divine kingdom. Soren also closed his eyes at this moment. Killing her mother and the loyal old dog Heath was too heavy for Vivian. If she had to do it herself, she would probably feel uneasy for the rest of her life. If that's the case, then let me bear all the sins. The attack on the divine kingdom of fear must not fail. Even if he didn't kill them, if the Dread Lord won, then everything would be meaningless. In the end, Soren chose to do it himself. Attacking the divine kingdom of fear was a gamble in itself, and for this battle, Soren almost put his own future on the line, so he couldn't back down and give up no matter what. Killing his mother? These might be able to threaten the kind Vivian, but they would never be able to threaten Soren. He was an evil god standing in the bottomless abyss. His path to godhood had long been stained with blood. If the Dreadlord thought that he could threaten him with two souls, then the enemy was too naive. Divine shockwave. The golden divine power directly hit the throne of fear. With the vibration of the distance, the two souls gradually dissipated under the brilliance of the divine power. Lillian had returned to her body. "Sister." Her anxious voice resounded in his mind as she hurriedly said, "Hurry up and do it. It's almost too late." Vivian slowly raised her head. Her expression at the moment was a little blank, but it was more of a pitiful sadness. A trace of anger appeared in the little girl's eyes, and then it burned like a raging fire. Her small figure floated in the air, looking at the darkness around the throne of fear and said coldly, "I want to die with my mother and Heath." Her voice became colder and colder, and in the end, it turned into a sharp sound wave. A terrible wind raged on the throne of fear. At this moment, Vivian seemed to have turned black, and there was a terrible killing intent in her eyes that had never been seen before. A huge amount of divine power surged out like a tsunami. The divine power from the other sons of fear was crazily injected into the throne of fear. The terrible power caused a crack to appear on the throne of fear. The crack gradually expanded, and the whole throne of fear also showed signs of collapse. Vivian was fighting for the power of the divine title of fear. Although the Dread Lord had died, his divine title was still sealed in the throne of fear. He just distributed his divine power to the sons of fear. "Yes. Destroy this place. That's it, sister. Let me give you a hand." Small black wings appeared behind Vivian, and Lillian's will also appeared. She cooperated with the little girl to use the divine power of fear to crazily attack the throne, destroying the balance and power in it, and destroying the last hope of the Dreadlord's resurrection. "Oh, damn it." The black shadow roared crazily, and then the black breath around gathered together and turned into the figure of a man wearing black armor and holding a huge sword. This was the true body of the Dread Lord. It was also the last body that his soul could condense. He rushed towards the two little girls crazily, ready to stop them from destroying the throne of fear. However, at this time a golden light appeared in the sky again, and a huge golden palm stretched out from the sky. Soren's low voice sounded, "Your enemy is me." Divine form. Outside of the divine realm of fear, Soren's figure turned into a golden giant hundreds of meters high. Because of the avatar crisis, his body could not enter the divine realm of fear, but his power could penetrate the plane barrier. At this moment he was completely squandering his divine power to fight with the enemy. The golden body was constantly consuming his stored divine power. Boom! There was a loud sound of cracking. In the corner of the throne of fear, the huge skull with burning flames had cracked and separated from the throne of fear. With the whistling of the wind, it fell from a height of thousands of meters. Cracks appeared one after another. The runes engraved on the throne of fear had already cracked. Even the stone pillars supporting the throne had cracks on them. "Ah!" Vivian's sharp cry sounded. At this moment the little girl's clothes had turned into flying ashes. Under the structure of divine power, a strange black dress armor appeared. A black sword of destruction appeared in her palm. The little girl roared and held the sword with both hands directly into the center of the throne of fear. Chapter 980. Rumble. The throne of fear that had stood in the God's kingdom for thousands of years finally collapsed. With the destruction of the throne of fear, tens of thousands of souls flew out from the throne of fear. Vivian's battle was over. As the body of fear, only she could easily destroy the throne of fear. However, Soren's battle was not over yet, because Vivian had only destroyed the soul vessel of the Dread Lord, and the essence of the Dread Lord's soul still needed Soren to end it. Slaughter, realm. Crafty, realm. Death, realm. The golden light spread out like waves, and Soren's arm was like the palm of a titan, directly grabbing the shadow after the throne of fear was broken. An enemy with great divine power was very scary. However, if the enemy was already dead and only a soul was left, Soren was not afraid at all. The power of slaughter and death blocked all the escape routes of the Dread Lord. Soren's body could not enter this world, so it was impossible for him to fight hand to hand. The only way he could kill the Dread Lord was to use the most direct and violent divine power shockwave. Oh! With a desperate roar, the shadow gradually shattered under the impact of Soren's divine power. This was the most direct way to destroy the enemy, using a huge amount of divine power to crush the enemy, but it was also the most exhausting way to fight. Countless souls surged out. As an evil god, the Dread Lord had bound many souls over the years. These souls were not only the believers who went against his will, but also the believers of other hostile gods. These believers were sacrificed to please the Dread Lord, and the Dread Lord imprisoned their souls. This was the most common method used by evil gods. The Queen of Spiders had imprisoned many elven souls. Now with the death of the Dread Lord, these souls were free. However, Soren did not intend to let these souls go. He was not a compassionate god. With the spread of the golden light, Soren's huge palm grabbed these souls and kept them in his palm. These were all high-quality souls. The Dread Lord would use them to complete his throne and bind them to provide him with power. Meanwhile, Soren was preparing to turn them into petitioners. After Vivian took over the Dread Lord's divine title, she would need a new batch of petitioners. The last of his aura dissipated. As the Dread Lord's soul was completely erased by Soren, countless golden rays of light rained down like meteors. This was the power of the Dread Lord's divinity and quintessence. The divinity released by the fall of a powerful god was extremely frightening. Most of the power surged into Vivian's body, including the fear and strife priesthoods. The fear priesthoods entered Vivian's soul, while the strife priesthoods entered Lillian's soul. These were the two souls that were most qualified to inherit the power of the Dread Lord. The third person was Soren, who held the divinity of slaughter and death. The power of death surged into Soren's body. As the successor of the three death gods, Soren obtained about 1/3 of the power. As for the rest of the divinity, it was scattered among the other creatures on the battlefield. Not only the Baelor Lord Sauron, but even the succubus owner's mother, Rhinalise, obtained the power of divinity. Then she automatically gained the legendary ability of Fear Aura. The demonic power Sauron obtained the most divinity. It was about 8 divinity, and at the same time, a small amount of quintessence was absorbed. Many greater demons obtained 1 to 2 divinity. These scattered divinity added up to about 30 divinity. They were automatically absorbed by the beings that were compatible with them. The ugly monkey and some demon hunters also obtained this power. Among them, more than 10 demon hunters automatically understood the Fear Aura. A powerful god would have at least 300 divinity and quintessence. Because this was the kingdom of fear, the divinity and quintessence were not scattered. The Dread Lord was an old god. Even if he didn't do much in the past 1,000 years, his divinity should be more than 320 divinity. It was more difficult to increase the quintessence, so it could only be calculated as 300 divinity. Vivian and Lillian obtained most of the divine power. Along with the cold prompt, the divinity that Soren obtained also appeared in front of his eyes. You've killed the Dread Lord. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've obtained 32 million slaughter EXP. The target has divinity. Extracting the target's divinity. You've obtained 77 divinity. The target has quintessence. Extracting the target's quintessence. You've obtained 75 quintessence. The power of fear domain has increased. The power of slaughter domain has increased. The power of death domain has increased. The power of domination domain has increased. The power of order domain has increased. The power of evil domain has increased. You've obtained tyranny domain. You've obtained strife domain. The powerful divinity and divine power from the Dread Lord were absorbed by Soren. As expected of an enemy with great divine power, Soren obtained the most divinity in history. And this was only a part of it. The Dread Lord's soul energy was devoured by Soren, which brought him as much as 32 million slaughter EXP. Not only did it make up for the millions of slaughter EXP that Soren used to kill the Dread Lord, but it also gave him more than 20 million slaughter EXP. The divine power alone wasn't enough to defeat the golden giant hand. Soren had almost completely entered the form of a divine spirit in the battle just now, and he was burning hundreds of thousands of slaughter EXP every minute. Most of the power went into Vivian's body. But at this moment, the little girl didn't have much joy on her face. On the contrary, she looked quite sad and murmured, "Heath, mother. Heath." A strong repulsive force appeared. Vivian's figure automatically rose into the air. The power of the Dread Lord allowed her to directly advance to intermediate divine power, but this also meant that the power of the Avatar crisis was acting on her body, and the kingdom of God was gradually rejecting her. Soren looked at the sad Vivian. The golden giant hand suddenly spread out in front of her, and then 2 white souls appeared in his palm. Vivian immediately covered her mouth in surprise when she saw it, and then her face was full of disbelief and surprise. "Mother." The little girl seemed to want to rush over, but the power of the kingdom of God had already made her angry, and an irresistible force was sending her out of the kingdom of God. Outside the kingdom of God. Soren sighed softly, and then broke through the air to directly catch Vivian. If he didn't do so, the little girl would fall directly into the material plane. Because she had already become a god. Chapter 981. With the death of the Dread Lord, the battle in the Divine Kingdom soon ended. Some of the Dark Guards died directly, and the rest of the petitioners also fell in large numbers. These were the existences whose souls were bound by the Dread Lord. Because of the complete death of the Dread Lord, they also fell. As for the rest of the petitioners, their reaction was very fast. They immediately turned to Vivian's subordinates. Some of the Dread Lords who did not fall almost immediately surrendered to Vivian. Although the main battle was over, there were still many battles left. Although Vivian inherited the Dread Priesthood, there were still many things in the Divine Kingdom that she could not control. These needed to be cleaned up by Soren's army. Moreover, the wealth accumulated by the Dread Kingdom for thousands of years was still a huge amount of resources, even if a lot of it was given out. Mordor City suffered heavy losses in this battle. Sauron's demon army was a little better. At most, he could go back to the Abyss and recruit new demons. The Abyss did not have many things, but there were too many demons. However, the number of golem puppets in Mordor City was so large that it almost wiped out Soren's resources. In this battle, nearly 80% of the clay golems had died and 70% of the stone golems had been damaged. The iron golems had suffered the greatest loss, because they had used up a lot of energy from their self-destruction. In the end, there were only 30 or so stone golems that could move. Half of the diamond golems were scrapped, and the remaining diamond golems were also seriously damaged. Mordor City had destroyed nearly 10,000 golem puppets in this battle, which almost wiped out the foundation of the golem army that had been accumulated since the Avatar crisis. The direct economic loss was not easy to calculate, but 10 million Kindler was definitely more than that. With such a heavy loss of the golem army, Soren's golem factory almost needed to start manufacturing again. And this required a lot of resources. To make up for the loss of the golem army, he could only plunder resources from the Divine Kingdom of Fear. The loss of the Einherjar army was also not small. 3 of the otherworldly divine servants had died in battle. 50% of the demon hunters had died, and 30% of the petitioners had died. Almost a third of Soren's wealth was gone in an instant. Wars between gods' kingdoms were always so tragic. If it weren't for the fact that the losses were so great, the gods wouldn't have been so restrained. After the Throne of Terror was destroyed, the Baelor Flame Demon Lord Sauron returned with his demon army. On the other hand, Soren's petitioners began to spread out and occupy the Divine Kingdom of Fear, collecting all kinds of resources as much as possible. If Vivian wanted to enter the Kingdom of God, she had to wait until the end of the Avatar crisis. Soren couldn't send an army into the Kingdom of Fear again. Therefore, how many people could be taken away this time would determine how much strength could be restored during the Avatar crisis. Although the casualties were very shocking. However, it was all worth it. Putting aside the power that Soren had gained, just the fact that Vivian and Lillian had advanced to become mid-tier gods was already the greatest success. Now, there were already 2 mid-tier gods in Mordor City. As long as Vivian successfully mastered the power of the Dread Lord, Soren wouldn't have the slightest fear even if the enemy was a greater god. At the same time, in the distant material plane, there were many dark basements, wilderness caves, and dark corners of the city. Many altars and shrines that were responsible for worshipping the Dread Lord had undergone astonishing changes. Accompanied by a golden radiance, the original statue of the Dread Lord suddenly disappeared. Then 2 twin statues of the Dread Lord appeared, one on the left and one on the right. These were the statues of Vivian and Lillian. One of them took over the priesthood of Fear, and the other took over the priesthood of Strife. Such a great change meant that the Dread Lord had completely fallen. Although the Church of the Dread Lord in the material plane had been severely damaged, it was undoubtedly going to collapse at this moment. Many priests and believers who originally served the Dread Lord gave up their faith and went to other evil gods, such as the Goddess of Night, the Lord of Storms, the Goddess of Ocean, and so on. As a new god, Vivian didn't inherit much of the original faith of the Dread Lord. The already few believers directly lost nearly 60% of them after she took over the priesthood. However, this didn't matter at all. Because at the same time that Vivian succeeded in becoming a god, her temple had begun to be built in Mordor City, and the church that had been gathered was quickly unified and built a basic outline. Everything of the Dread Lord wasn't suitable for her to inherit. As a new god, the most suitable thing for Vivian was undoubtedly the re-established church. Mordor City. The Grand Harvest celebration was still going on. However, the complete fall of the Dread Lord couldn't be hidden from others at all. The first to know was the Goddess of Agriculture, then Soren's god, the Maiden of Pain, and then other gods in the material plane also got the news, and they all turned their attention to the island of Mordor. No one thought that Soren would use the name of the harvest celebration to confuse others, and then directly attack the kingdom of the Dread Lord and finally win. This was simply unimaginable. The war of the gods' kingdom was far more intense than the war in the material plane. With the mortal army of Motor City, even if they invested 1,000,000, it was unlikely to win. But now Soren actually destroyed the Dread Throne, which meant that he still had a very powerful hidden power, and this power was something that they had never noticed. Vivian and Lillian fell into a state of half-sleep as soon as they returned to Motor City. This was something that they had to face when they officially became gods, because they had begun to receive the prayers of their believers. However, compared to Soren's painful state when he just became a god, the two girls were obviously much more relaxed. At least they didn't fall into the kind of chaos in their souls that was suddenly hit by a huge amount of prayer information. They could accommodate all prayers and beliefs, and began to learn how to respond to the prayers of their believers and give the priests the corresponding divine spells. This was a very complicated ability, but it was something that every god had to face. Soren could teach them how to respond to prayers and give them divine spells, but the two girls still had to master how to deal with it. They had just become gods and had been learning these things almost all day, especially the ability to give priests divine spells. At present, nearly a third of the priests in the church that served them hadn't received divine spells. After all, the two of them didn't have the data ability of Soren. Without the divine network, each divine spell had to be given by themselves. The Grand Harvest celebration was still going on. However, Motor City seemed to have fallen into silence after the shocking battle. No one would think that Soren, the Lord of Shadows, would stop so easily. Obviously. He was brewing a bigger conspiracy, and was recovering and accumulating strength to find the next target. Chapter 982. The complete death of the Dread Lord seemed to have removed a mountain from Soren's heart. At this moment he could finally breathe a sigh of relief because history had been completely changed by him. Lillian, the Witch of Fear, did not die in the hands of the Silvermoon Lady, and she also took over the divine title of Strife. As for the Silvermoon Lady, she was caught in the war with the Lady of Night. The two ancient goddesses who had been fighting for countless years were already in a fierce battle. The goddess of agriculture returned to the continent after the harvest celebration. However, before she left, she talked to Soren for a while. Before she left, she looked at Soren deeply. At this time, the city of Motor had become one of the most powerful forces in the material plane. Although Vivian was still learning how to become a true god, receiving faith and giving divine spells, the power of the Dread Lord had gathered on them. As mid-level gods, their combat power was quite amazing. As for Soren himself, he was also in an important stage of accumulation at this moment. The divine power of the Dread Lord still needed to be completely integrated with him. The more than 30 million slaughter EXP still needed to be arranged. Soren's strength needed to be accumulated before he could break through again. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Soren, who returned to the city of Motor, was busy controlling the new power of divinity, and the first thing to improve was his divinity. After successfully killing the Dread Lord, Soren's divinity accumulated to 350 points, and he became a great divinity. After Soren killed the number one enemy, he didn't need to deliberately keep the slaughter EXP. Finally, he could use it to level up his profession. At this time, Soren's attributes had become quite amazing. Name, Soren, Holy Form, Mid-Level Divine Power. Race, Half-Elf, Massacre God's Son. Attributes, Strength 24, Agility 44, Constitution 30, Intelligence 31, Wisdom 22, Charm 26. Alignment, Lawful Evil Class, Level 15 Rogue 035500000, Level 10 Shadow Dancer, Max, Level 10 Wizard, 042250000, Level 16 Arcanist, 048500000, Grade 8. Health Points, 825825, Robust, EXP. 1505075 Slaughter EXP, 35,545 Profession EXP, Unassigned. Skill Points, None Attribute Points, None Legend, 350. Divinity, 350, Middle Divinity. Upgrading, Greater Divinity, requires 900 points. Godhood, 240, Mid-Grade Godhood, requires 300 points to upgrade, Great Divinity. Divine Power, 1513480. Upgrading to Greater Divine Power, Requires 1200 divine power points and mastery of deities descending as divine law. The current divinity storage limit is 4,800 points. Clergy, Shadow, Thief, Half-Elf, Rogue, Tracker. Domains: tyranny, strife, mage, disease, poison, trickery, slaughter, death, fear, evil, domination, piracy, shadow, flora. Spirit chi, evil spirit chi, fear spirit chi. Status: normal. Basic skills: Sneak 655, Literacy 535, Steal 525, Pick Lock 475, Snare 415, Focus 425, Negotiate 585, Appraise 425, Deceive 425, Intimidation 675, Taunt 355, Perform 375, Listen 485, Dodge 525, Parry 385, Block 375, Heal 375, Search 475, Detect 605, Scroll Copy 375, Spell Identify 415, Survival 385, Use Magic Equipment 375, Cooking 325, Alchemy 515, Forge Magic Weapon 375. Saint Form. Transcendence, Spell Immunity 1 to 4, Epic Divine Power, Instant Spell Cast 1 to 3. Godhood Immunity, Acid, Electricity, Fire, Instant Death. Godhood Abilities: Space Change, Death's Hand, Reality Change, Form Change, Divine Power, Shockwave, Language Proficiency, Character Proficiency, Interplane Communication, Astral Teleportation, Plane Teleportation. Legendary Skills: Epic Magic Power, Epic Spellcast, Epic Spellcast, Epic Spellcast, Epic Spellcast, Epic Spellcast, Epic Tenacity, Epic Spell Penetration, Epic Reflex, Epic Weakness Detection, Perfect Dual Wielding, Omnipotent Hands, Epic Evasion, Epic Battle Skills, Epic Dexterity, Epic Intelligence, Epic Constitution. Special Abilities: Blessing of the Goddess of Magic, God Slayer, Blessing of the Misfortune Goddess, Blessing of the Sea Goddess, Dragon Blood Baptism LV2, Heart of Slaughter, Slayer, Death Walker, Ascetic, Erudite, Blasphemy. Personal Abilities: Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory, Perseverance, Encyclopedic Knowledge, Spellcasting Proficiency, Reflex Evasion, Intuitive Evasion, Roll Evasion, Agile Movement, Evade Sight, Dark Vision, Combat Spellcasting, Mobile Spellcasting, Spell Control, Empower Spell, Extreme Spellcasting, Craft Magical Equipment, Spell Penetration, High Magic Resistance, High Cold Resistance, High Fire Resistance, High Poison Resistance, High Lightning Resistance, Sturdy, High Regeneration. Advanced: Telepathy 100 feet. Profession Abilities: Arcane Memory, Arcane Counterspell, Arcane Runes, Shadow Dominator, Nimble Mind, Military Weapon, Proficiency, Curved Sword, Legendary. Combat Skills: Summon Shadow, any, Shadow Jump, any, Shadow Strike, any, Shadow Jump, any, Vampiric Touch, Divinity, Sword Form, Heavy Hack, Sword Form, Horizontal Slash, Sword Form, Beheading, Sword Form, Waist Chop, Sword Form, Spinning Strike, Spinning Slash. After killing the Dread Lord, Soren's strength had increased tremendously. If one were to use specific data to calculate, it would take more than 3 days and 3 nights to finish. However, the most obvious increase could still be calculated. The most obvious was the increase in his attributes and basic abilities. Soren had completely caught up with the old gods. Then there was an additional ability, Divinity Immunity. This was the standard for becoming a great god. Soren's divinity immunity was acid, lightning, fire, and instant death. Simply put, acid damage and acid spells were ineffective against Soren. Lightning spells and lightning damage were ineffective against Soren. He was completely immune to normal fire damage, and any instant death would be automatically ignored. Soren was completely immune to all instant death spells. Of course, the power of the divine spark immunity was not completely obtained, because this ability also included immunity to attribute absorption, immunity to attribute damage, disease, cold, disintegration, energy absorption, mental influence, paralysis, poison, sleep, intimidation, transformation, imprisonment, banishment, and so on. Soren was still not a great god. So currently he was mainly improving to deal with the most common damage effects. Then there were the legendary abilities, which were legendary spell maximization, epic magic, and legendary spell instant cast. These abilities could not be enhanced by the power of the divinity. Even Soren had to rely on his own profession level to obtain these abilities. The most obvious increase was in the divinity of shadow. Soren had now completely merged with the divinity of shadow. He had obtained the ability to summon shadows at will, jump 500 meters at will, attack at will, and travel at will. Simply put, he could use these abilities infinitely. He had come into contact with the origin of the shadow power. These abilities within the scope of the divinity had no limit at all. Unless he lost the divinity of shadow, in that case, he would recover the abilities brought by his original profession level. The closer Soren was to the great divine power, the more he felt the horror of the great divine power. He finally knew why there were not many great divine powers promoted for so long. It was because the 900 divinity value alone was already a difficult task. If there was no outbreak of the Avatar crisis, it would take a normal god many years to accumulate it. Now Soren's divinity value had reached 240 points. That was to say, as long as he killed a strong enough target, then he could officially enter the range of great divine power and be qualified to become the main god of a divine system. The end of the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer. Around the end of next year, the last wave of impact would break out. There was not much time left for Soren. Because when the Avatar crisis was completely over, it was not easy for Soren to kill a weak divine power god. This often meant that he needed to completely destroy the other party's church and divine kingdom. At that time, the structure of the gods would be stabilized again. In the blink of an eye, it was early September. The silent Mordor city was accumulating strength, and the golem factory was constantly producing new puppets. At this time, some new things began to appear, such as the bank that had recently appeared in Mordor City, and a large number of farms in the Windspear Hills. After enduring for a long time, the elemental god finally couldn't help but take action. Near the Eastern Sea, the god of water elements and the god of fire elements broke out in a shocking battle. Fortunately, this battle was far away from human territory and did not cause too many casualties. Therefore, the gods were already very busy and did not want to care about it. The rampaging fire and water elements raged near the battlefield. This mess could not be cleaned up during the Avatar crisis. It could only be slowly dealt with after the Avatar crisis. Note, the sequelae of the elemental turmoil will remain until the end of the Avatar crisis. The god of light had also encountered a little trouble recently. That was, near the holy city, some traces of the undead gradually emerged. What made the holy knights even more uneasy was that they actually found traces of the Winter Ghost. Winter Ghost, Challenge Level 25. The Winter Ghost was made by the demigod Lich who sought the ultimate limit of the power of the undead. They usually stayed in the forgotten corrupted fortresses in the astral world or the negative energy world. They were terrible evil creations in a long history, and they were extremely powerful liches. Vampires and demigod Lich could get the help of the Winter Ghost and form a temporary alliance. These terrible creatures had the special ability of Cold Aura. They could use withering fire, and they could launch a destructive blow that was far beyond the power of the gods. They were the ultimate creation of the demigod Lich, and their natural strength value had reached a terrifying 52 points. That's right. These terrible monsters were even higher than the father of the oak tree in terms of strength value. If it weren't for the characteristics of the undead, even the gods would not have much chance of winning against them. But now it was the time of the Avatar crisis, and the gods did not have much advantage against the Winter Ghost in the form of saints. This kind of creature should not appear in the material plane. They should stay in the death plane with the strongest negative energy, but now they actually appeared, and there seemed to be other forces behind them. P.S. The attributes of the Winter Ghost can be searched on Baidu Encyclopedia. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.